1.
Folks, it's that wonderful, wonderful, wonderful time of the year. Football's back in 2 weeks. It's great. You know, this is the annual AFC Preview show. Big Rat's here he's here every year for the show. Danny's here as well. Greg Thompson from Cover One will be here in just a little bit as I go back and now draft fantasy football because that's shout out Matt Lorenzo, that's what he does. But Big Rat, before we start, any questions? Week 1 survival underdogs or upsets. What is that team? I gotta ask because I'm struggling. It's a lot. It's really hard this year.
Okay. One, I think it is. Famously, we'll never forget the 2021 season, Texans-Jaguars, when everyone thought the Texans were like the worst team in NFL history. They were going to go 0-17, and they were never going to win a game. And you pick them Survivor Week 1 and never have to pick them ever again. That was excellent. The best, we'll get into each team. I think an interesting one, I don't think it's as ballsy as some of the ones I've given in years past, but I think Indianapolis against Houston, this Houston team that everybody's in love with, that everyone is just fawning over right now, that Colts team, it's in Indianapolis. Indy beat them once last year. I think that's an interesting one to look for Week 1. Get a team out of the way that you don't necessarily want to save for the rest of the season. You know Anthony Richardson's going to be healthy now. You don't know if he'll be healthy the whole year. It's a home division game. I think that's a good
like that because there's a very ballsy one that I have that like I want to do, and my heart of hearts is telling me to do it. And I'll get into that later, but I think you guys know where it is. I have a couple spreads for Week 1 that I love, but we'll talk about that later. But anyway, I feel like it's best, we just jump right into the AFC South because I don't know if it's the most nonchalant division, but it's the one division where I remember last year saying Jacksonville's going to run away with it or Jacksonville's like the favorite. Not the case anymore. But this division is intriguing because you have, I think Tennessee's that like 4th place team because they're not going to be doing really much of anything. I feel like they're just like, hey, status quo, win maybe 6-7 games, see what happens. But it's the other 3. Jacksonville, I feel like will be back and better. Indianapolis, look, if they can stay healthy, they'll be fine. And then Houston's this team where they're going to get tested often and early. Like, I already look at that Week 2 Sunday Night Football game for them as a huge for both teams because all offseason we've been hearing about how Houston's a Super Bowl contender and how Chicago, the Bears are back. The Bears are going to be great. That game, Week 2 Sunday Night Football, is going to tell us a lot about both sides, and I'm very excited for that one.
Yeah, I mean, for the AFC South as a whole, I mean, the Colts to me are one of the hardest teams to talk about in the NFL because I think it's a genuine question. Can Anthony Richardson play more, like not just play the whole season because most quarterbacks don't play the whole season, for the most part. But can Anthony Richardson play like 12 games, 13 games, Like I think that's a genuine question. I think the upside is obvious. Like Steichen's an offensive genius. Steichen caused everyone to overrate Justin Herbert his rookie year. He caused everyone to overrate Jalen Hurts 2 years ago. Steichen's a magician for a good reason. But I genuinely don't know if Anthony Richardson could stay healthy. I think that is a genuinely unanswerable question because these guys, it's kind of like Trey Lance. These guys that like never played in college and like didn't play much in high school, like for whatever reason, it just seems like it keeps the trend keeps happening where they keep missing games. And Richardson's ability to, you can't have it both ways. You want to run him because you want to maximize his athleticism, but then that's also how he gets hurt. So I think it's a really unanswerable question. So like to me, they're the hardest team to figure out in the whole NFL because I have no feel for how many games Richardson is going to play. And I think the Jags will be kind of more of the same. I think they'll kind of be an 8 or 9 win team like they were last year. And it's just a question of, like, are the Texans going to meet the hype, in which case Jaguars will finish second in the division and miss the playoffs? Or will the Texans be closer to what they were last year? Maybe not ready to take this next step like everyone thinks, but just kind of being a 9 and 10 win team again. Then Jacksonville can actually steal the division. And I think the Titans, I don't think I'm going out on a limb here. I think I agree with most people that they're at the bottom of the division. One big problem in the AFC is you need to find bad teams. Like we talk about this every year. You need to have teams that win 4 games. Like it's just the math of the schedule doesn't work unless you have multiple teams like Griff's Patriots that can just go out there and go 4-13. You need a few teams like that. So I think there's upside with the Titans. Like Levis is a second-year quarterback. Maybe he can grow. Maybe he can improve. But you need to have 4-win teams. And unfortunately, aside from New England, Tennessee seems as good of a bet as any.
So Mr. Big Rat, who put a generational grade on Trevor Lawrence is having them miss the playoffs yet again?
They made the playoffs once in his year, and I will admit, like I'm sure I think a big part of this NFL offseason is who's willing to admit they were wrong. I'm not done. Like, Trevor Lawrence's career is not over. Like, it's not like we do this all the time where by year 3 or 4, that's the finished product. It can't get any better than this. And then you got guys like Jared Goff who, like, on year 8 are still getting better in Detroit. Like, it doesn't have to be so rigid like that. However, we can admit that through 3 years, the results have been not as good as we thought they would be. And I think this summer, like, you really see it in people's quarterback rankings. Who is, like, stubbornly leaving Trevor Lawrence in the top 10? And who's being, like, an adult about it? And, like, recognizing, okay, maybe he's only, like, 14 or 15 right now, and that's okay. He doesn't have to stay this way forever. Maybe he can improve. But let's just judge it by what the results have been. And I feel like that this summer's a big reflection of that. I think if we're being fair about Trevor, he has not lived up to the hype. He is still a good quarterback. He is not as good as we thought he would be. And maybe he gets better, maybe he doesn't, but we can acknowledge safely, okay, he's not generational at this point.
Yeah, my big
Wow, Big Rat admitting his wrongs. I like that. We're showing growth right there, bro.
They get this confusion about me because I always rub it in their face when they're
We're showing growth, bro.
which I love to do, which I love to just throw it in their face when they're wrong all the time, and we'll do it on this show. That means I'm not willing to apply it to myself as well. I am. I'm just not as loud about it as I am to them when I rub their mistakes in their face, like when Danny thought Nick Foles was a great NFL quarterback, or when he thought Jalen Hurts was better than this. Been bad.
I didn't see now. You take a truth and you stretch the truth.
I never said
Nick
better
Foles
than
was great.
Tannehill. You said he was better than Tannehill, and then Tannehill had a career years in Tennessee, and Nick Foles got benched for fucking Gardner Minshew and Mitch Trubisky. Like, clear ass L. Wrong, loss. Like, decisively.
I think that's the majority opinion from NFL fans that know what they're talking about. But all right.
No smart NFL fan thinks that Nick Foles was a top 20 quarterback.
So my big thing with the
it's just baseline better than.
So I was going to say my big thing with the culture now is if Anthony Richardson gets hurt and Joe Flacco has to come in to be quarterback, it causes a stir where if Joe Flacco sucks, everyone's going to go, oh, but what happened last year in Cleveland? Oh, comeback player of the year, led them to the playoffs. Not like that their ass kicked in the playoffs, but still. So that's where it kind of like worries me in that sense for him. Like, I know they have our podcast favorite receiver, our boy MPJ, got his bag this offseason. Congrats to Michael. But the Colts are just so intriguing because, like, you don't know what they have. You don't know what you're going to get. The Colts are really, you throw shit at a wall and you expect it to stick. Will it fall down? It's like, back like when you're cooking pasta and like the pasta will stick to the fridge and sometimes it just falls down if it's not done. Same thing. Houston, I like Houston. I just don't want like everyone going, oh, this is going to be a 13-4 team. They're going to go to the Super Bowl. I honestly think they're going to face some lumps and they're going to be that team that just gets, like, if they lose the Colts, everyone, because they're going to be an overreaction Monday week 1 if they lose. Everyone's like, oh, we thought it was a new team, knew this, what's going on, yada, yada, yada. And then Jacksonville. What happens if Trevor Lawrence is bad and Mac Jones has a career revitalization there? I'll cry myself to sleep if that happens.
With that. What are we doing?
Look good. He's looked good, man. He's looked good.
He has looked good. I'll give him credit, but come on now. Like they just gave Trevor Lawrence like $300 million like a few weeks ago.
Oh yeah, he'll never start there, but I think he's gonna find a starting job once again somewhere.
He'll end up on a mediocre team. Sam Darnold gets hurt, they trade him to the Vikings.
He will. Look, Mike Gesicki, like for all the problems I had with him in Miami, he looked a lot worse in New England than he probably deserved. Jonnu Smith, like, looked great in Atlanta last year. He's lighting up Dolphins training camp right now, and he was a bust in New England. It's very possible that the New England offensive ecosystem just got so bad that like everyone looks worse than they actually are, and maybe Mac Jones is better than he showed somewhere else.
Yeah.
Well, of course, Zach Wilson.
Speaking of Zach Wilson, we're going to go to the AFC West, where there's not a lot to discuss because we all think we know who's going to win the division, Kansas City. But my big question is, and I have something to say with this team right now, figure out how you said there always has to be bad teams in the NFL. One team that I think, honestly, is going to be bad is Las Vegas. Look, they did nothing really to improve this offseason. They're very much status quo. I feel like they're that kid in school where it's like, hey, I'm comfortable getting a C every year. Like I don't need to go out and get extra credit and do all this stuff. Because how, like, hey, we hired our boy, Antonio Pierce is here. this Browns team, this Raiders team gives me like a 2019 Browns vibes, where everyone was so high on them and then they kind of like shrink down. And also the fact that, like you're saying, Gardner Minshew starting. Will Devontae Adams be a Jet? We don't know. But when I look at the Raiders this year, they don't do it for me. Like there's something about them where I'm just like, I think this could be an ugly, like you're saying there has to be 3, 4, 5 win teams. I think that's going to be Las Vegas.
I think with Vegas, bro, they were just so locked in on trying to get Michael Penix, and then he went early to the Falcons, and they just scrambled and were like, "What do we do?" Like take Bowers, whatever they. And I was talking to Miguel the other day, and he was like, "Oh, Sean Payton's coming out saying like we tricked the Raiders into thinking we were gonna take this guy, and we took Bo Nix." And he's like, "We didn't really even want Bo Nix, but Bo Nix has been looking good. Like if Bo Nix becomes a franchise quarterback, it just makes the Raiders look that much worse." But yeah, they're just there. Let them lose games, let them trade us Devontae, and enjoy your top pick next year.
Yeah, there's an interesting it's an interesting lesson in these like bad teams that rally and like win some games in the second half of the year. They finished 8-9. Like if they had just kept McDaniels and like finished with like 3 or 4 wins or 5 wins, they would have at least gotten Penix, maybe even Nix. Like they would have been they were drafting 13th for a reason. They rose too high up the standings in the second half of the season, and you often see that where you win too many games, you still don't make the playoffs, and then it's like you kind of don't have a good way to get a new quarterback as a result because their cap sheet is so overblown. My boy Christian Wilkins, I wish him the best. I'm sure he's going to do great there. I'll talk more about the decision to let him go and why most Dolphin fans are probably okay with it now as we get to the Dolphin side of things. But yeah, they're a team that needs to win with defense and with like safe, efficient quarterback play. And like teams like that, it's just like you win by 3 points or you lose by like 15. Like when you play like that.
Yeah.
And especially like God, you're in the same division as Mahomes. Like I don't see the playoff hype personally. Like I think their win total was at 6.5. I think that's about right. I could see them going 6-11, 5-12, 4-13. And if they beat their win total, they're probably going to go like 7-10 or 8-9. It's like they're in this like tight box of what they can do. They don't have too much upside versus some of the other teams in this division. I will say, the Chiefs division line, I think still has value. I know it's at like minus 250. That's not high enough. Like I do not see how they don't win the division. Like you bet them to win the division anyways, even when people are gassing up the other teams in the division like they did 2 years ago when everyone was speculating, can the Broncos with Russ and the Chargers with Herbert, can 3 or 4 teams make the playoffs from this division? No one's doing that, but they haven't raised the Chiefs price high enough in my opinion. Minus 250 or minus 260, whatever it is, that doesn't represent the near certainty of it that they're going to win this division. So I still think that's good value. Like for anyone who just wants to, you want to put $100 on it to win like 45, like I think that's a free way to get $45. Like go for it, do it.
And to reiterate Big Rat's point real quick about losing games at the end of the year to get your quarterback, like this is a fucking argument between fan bases every year in the NFL that you're a bad fan if you're rooting for losses. Root for losses. It's only going to help your team, in the future. That 1 week of a win that means nothing does not make you a bad fucking fan if you're rooting against them. So I never understood that. Like so many people are so passionate about you need to always root for your team to win. No, that's so dumb. Such an outdated logic.
To win when you're in that like wild card hunt towards the end of Christmas.
Of course.
If you're in that like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 gap for teams, root to win. If you're 11-16, root for losses to get the best draft pick. Last year for the Patriots, was it painful? Yes, but I know now, look, they got the quarterback, and we'll see if it works out. We'll talk about that later. But with a team like Vegas, that's where I was just thinking, look, towards the end of the year last year, they had the ass-whooping on Thursday Night Football against the Chargers, which in the long run might benefit the Chargers more than it benefits the Raiders. Like, look, the Chargers fired Brandon Staley, fired Tom Telesco, who's now the manager in Vegas, which I find hilarious. But, and I know it's like, oh, they didn't get a receiver. Joel Alt's going to be a Hall of Fame tackle one day, in my opinion. But, I just don't understand Vegas because of all the decisions they make. Like, they got Max Crosby. Like, he's good, but then besides Max Crosby, who do you have? You're expecting Tyree Wilson, your pit draft pick from last year, to stand up, and you're expecting all these other players to come and do their thing.
He looked bad, also.
Like, Tyree Wilson hasn't been impressive, and meanwhile, you caused Chandler Jones to fucking lose his marbles. and just do weird shit. But that's just another story. The only thing with Kansas City that I have to question about is Rashee Rice. Are we ever going to hear anything about that? Just because it's not like it's some little issue in the league. It's felony charges. It's because like I'm watching right now Pats Commanders and Sunday Night Football. But Thursday Night Football, Rashee Rice is out there, and he's got all these felony charges against him, and he's not suspended. How does Mike Tirico come on the air and explain, hey, this guy who caused a car wreck by street racing in downtown Dallas, fled the scene of the accident, but he's still playing, and he's not suspended. How does that look on an image of the team that's the world champion, I'm not trying to bash the Chiefs or anything like this in the way they'll handle it, but the league has to do something. You either have to commissioner exempt list him, suspend him, because in all honesty, you just can't have a guy out there who's broken the law on the field on your team, being your wide receiver week one.
Well, and they also ruled, I think, with the Zay Jones situation. Zay Jones got like a misdemeanor. His charges were dropped, and the NFL still suspended him for 5 games because of their own investigation that they conducted. So that's a really interesting thing, I think, moving forward, because that's the NFL establishing a precedent. You don't have to get charged for us to suspend you anyways. And obviously Rashee Rice's charges are much more serious. These are felony charges versus what Zay Jones was dealing with. So it's tricky, it's weird. I don't really know how it's going to go. There's part of me that thinks because we're reaching on September and we still don't have an answer, that maybe we're just not going to get an answer till next year, kind of like the Kamara thing that took a year for him to get suspended. But yeah, I'm not sure. It's weird, it's confusing, it's tricky. I will say Kansas City is better positioned to withstand that this year than they were last year, because now you have Hollywood Brown, now you have Xavier Worthy. Hollywood Brown will probably be back by like mid-September,
I think
early October or something like that. But early October, and then you have Xavier Worthy as well. Like they're in a better position where all those guys that they were relying on to be starters last year, like Sky Moore, Kadarius Toney, MVS, those guys are either off the team or way down the depth chart. Like they're not the priority anymore. I remember Chris Raybon, that was his argument for why he thought they were going to win the Super Bowl, because he basically argued the last few weeks of the playoffs, they just cut all those guys out of the rotation for the most part. Like they had touches, but very minimal. And they were a different team than they were in the regular season when those guys were causing pick sixes and dropping passes and getting penalties and all that other stuff. So with Worthy, I think they'll be fine. Chargers, the only thing I'll say on the Chargers is I'm a Harbaugh fan. Long term, always have been. I was a staunch Harbaugh defender when he was at Michigan for years and years. Consistent winning matters. That was the argument we used to always make for Andy Reid. Like, he'll never win the big one. If you consistently win 10, 11 games, at some point you probably will, just because at some point you'll probably just get lucky. And then from there, you don't have the monkey on your back. It's easier to win going forward from that point. Whole bunch of reasons. I think Harbaugh will turn the Chargers around. I think it wouldn't shock me if they do well this year, but it's hard to predict because Harbaugh notoriously, like everyone looks at that Chargers roster and they think, oh, they should only win like 6-7 games. They're not ready. They're more of a long-term bet. But Harbaugh in the NFL has only had like tremendous success. Like all his years in San Francisco until his last year, the first 3 years, they went to the NFC title game 3 years in a row. Like immediately, right away, as soon as he came in. I'm not saying that for the Chargers, but that prior success does kind of scare me a little bit from like completely just ignoring them.
So my big thing with the Chiefs, we'll get to the Chiefs in a second. My big thing with the Chargers is I can see them, 8-9, 9-8, flirting with the playoffs. Where like, do you guys remember the 22 Patriots where like towards the end of the year, like Big Red, obviously the game on New Year's, Patriots have to win to stay alive. They win that game, which ironically that game this year is Chargers going into New England to play the Pats. But then I don't know who they play week 18, but like that week 18 game for them is must win to like where the Chargers could be once again. Sunday Night Football, hey, both teams could tie and we could fuck over some people. Or, they play in that Saturday night ESPN slot. I can see that, but then week 18 where they fall short. And then next year, everyone's got that, like, the Mina Kimes thing where it's like, hey, watch for them. Like what she was doing with Detroit in like 21 and 22 where everyone's starting to like, hey, next year you get a couple more pieces and you'll be good. That's what I think of the Chargers. My only big question with the Chiefs, honestly, is do we think we still get an all-pro level from Travis Kelce, and do we think they three-peat? Just because I feel like with the Chiefs, it's becoming the New England standard where in the years that everyone thinks that they're going to walk over the league and win is the years they lose, and when everyone doubts them like they have the last couple of years is when they win.
I mean, you started to saw the signs of regression from Kelsey like in the regular season last year. I know he turned up in the playoffs a little bit, but like I think we're going to start to see the signs of regression, and Pat's going to have to be that much more better, which he's capable of doing. But three in a row, it's just never been done, man. I don't know if it can be done. I'm
And
not picking them.
yeah, and to add to that, I also want to say that last year, even when things were going poorly, because I always like to cite my DVOA data on this show, the Chiefs were always the Chiefs were always a top 5 team by DVOA because they had like one of the best defenses in the NFL. Like throughout all their problems, they were still always rated very highly, and their defense, I think you could genuinely argue by year's end that was probably the best defense in football in terms of from start to finish, from the start of the regular season to the end. They had the most consistent defense in the NFL. They limited the Dolphins, they limited the Bills, they limited the Ravens, and then they limited the 49ers. The only team that put up 27 points on the Chiefs was the Packers. That was the only team in the NFL that did that, which is an argument in the Packers' favor for this upcoming year. And so I think last year the Chiefs were still a good team. I could totally see a world where this year the Chiefs have a similar deal as last year where their record by like December, let's say they're like 8-6, right? 8-6, only a game above 500. Everyone starts to panic, and then you'll hear everyone on NFL Twitter and all the pundits just yell, but we said that last year, but we said that last year, but we said that last year. Like, everyone's just going to ignore any warning sign they see because they're going to default to last year, even though, again, last year, as embarrassing as, like, their Christmas Day loss to the Raiders was, they were still always a top 5 team in the league. Whereas, so I could definitely see a world where everyone is overreacting to that and then not paying enough attention to where things are going wrong, to where they like just blindly pick the Chiefs every week until you see them lose in the playoffs. Like I like the defense without L'Jarius Sneed was not only their best corner, he was probably their second best player on the entire defense behind Chris Jones. To just lose him, that matters. That matters a lot. L'Jarius Sneed arguably won them that Super Bowl because he forced that fumble of Zay Flowers in that Ravens game, which was like the biggest play in that game. So yeah, I would like. I just want to say, like Danny said, I would bet against it happening. When something hasn't happened in 60 years, just bet against it happening. I think that's a good bet. And my other prediction is in December and January, everyone is just going to yell that over and over again, like don't doubt the Chiefs, don't doubt the Chiefs, and like you try to raise your hand, but I see some warning signs here. Nope. We said that last year. I'm not even going to consider this opinion. And I think when they lose,
and you can kind of puff out your chest and go, "Hey, you should have listened to me." I would like this isn't coming at jealousy anywhere. I want to see a year where they they don't even get to Championship Sunday. Like something just goes wrong in the divisional playoffs, kind of like 2011. Danny remembers that season very well. I choose to forget it. But when the Jets went into Foxborough and they beat Tom Brady and the Patriots, I know last year was, can they go on the road and do it? But imagine they're hosting a game divisional Saturday or Sunday and they just have an off day and they lose. How does Kansas City respond to that? How does the National Media Football League media machine react when its golden boy doesn't even get to the Final Four? I want to see them face that adversity to where it's like, oh, hey, this isn't just going to get handed to us every year. Oh, hey, we just can't hop, skip, and jump and go and get right to Championship Sunday or the Super Bowl. That's just me. My big thing, too, with the Kansas City Chiefs defense is that Chris Jones technically helped win them that Super Bowl last year. Because remember, I know everyone likes to say Patrick Mahomes and all this stuff. Chris Jones had pressure on Brock Purdy on third down in overtime. That's why I was always saying, I was banging the drum, if Chris Jones were to have left the Chiefs, that would have been a monumentally collapsible loss of a player. You don't replace players like that. Chris Jones do not grow trees. That's just the nature of the business. But with Kansas City, though, I can see one of two worlds. One, a world where they just run roughshod. Again, hey, it's fine, it's great, it's this. Kind of like the 2015 New England Patriots. They basically just ran through the NFL. Then they lost the Sunday Night Football game in overtime to the Broncos. And then from there, we started seeing the warning signs of, hey, maybe this team's not as good as one thought. So we'll have to wait and see what happens there. But the one team I want to talk about is the man who just went off camera is Big Rat, because I know Big Rat's a little bit high on the Denver Broncos there. Or Danny, do you want to take this one away because he's on mute? He's back.
Yeah, I mean, not much to say. Not much to say. I mean, real quick from me, Bo Nix has been impressive. I didn't think much of him, and now what I've seen, I'm like, all right, he can operate an NFL offense. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm not thinking much of them, but I really want. They play the Jets this year. I think week 6 or 7. I'm just somehow, some way, I want Zach to be the fucking starting quarterback for that game, but we'll see.
He's on mute.
I think this is one of the better win total bets of the season to take the Broncos over when the win total's at 5.5. I think there's been some betting podcasts that I listen to that are now starting to talk about this, but I think for a few weeks there, they were kind of the most boring team in the league. They were the team that no one really wanted to discuss. And fitting to what I said earlier, that you need to have some bad teams. Like, I guess some people are just picking the Broncos to be the bad team. Sean Payton has never won less than 7 games in his career. Obviously, no one is that impressed with this division. It's not like it's that hard for Denver to win games in their division outside of Kansas City. Like, that wouldn't shock anyone at all. It wouldn't shock anyone here if they played the Raiders and Bo Nix was the better quarterback in the game. So I just think at a win total of 5.5, like, the Broncos can go 6-11 and come in last in this division, and you still cash. So I just think it's a really, really, really good value bet. Sean Payton never won less than 7 games, like I said. And I also think the way they play, like Sean Payton, for those who didn't watch Bo Nix in college, Bo Nix started the most games of any quarterback in college football history. No one started more games than Bo Nix did. Bo Nix led the college football last year in completion percentage, and he had like a super low air yards per attempt. So they had a very low A-dot, short passing game, and Bo Nix was just excellent at executing it. That kind of sounds like what Sean Payton wants to do anyways, like having a low A-dot, quick passing game, but like with phenomenal execution and decision-making to where you're picking the throw that gets 7 yards on first down and not the throw that gets 3 yards on first down. Making that differentiation as to which of those two plays is better more consistently in the long run adds up to a lot more yards per game. So I think this style of offense, I think Bo Nix is a great fit for that. I think because Bo Nix started more games than any quarterback in college football history, I don't think he necessarily is one of those quarterbacks that you have to wait 2 years to see what he is, that you have to wait till the end of the season to see what he is. I think he's going to kind of come in as a finished product, and it wouldn't shock me if he's just solid right away. I don't think you'll have to wait till November for Bo Nix to start having decent games. He might just be okay immediately with all the experience he has. So this style of offense that Denver has, I think, is very conducive to playing close games. I think it's conducive to when they play some of the better teams in the AFC having a chance in the fourth quarter because they're not running a lot of plays that get a lot of interceptions, that get a lot of sacks. They're not running those high variance shot plays that these other teams run. And I think running an offense like that, it might bore people. It might not be that interesting to watch, but I think it's conducive to playing close games. And I think when you only need to win 6 games, I think playing like that, where you're not going to beat yourself, you're not going to throw too many picks, you're not going to have a lot of 4 to 5 sack games. I think that's helpful in being a mediocre football team. And they don't even have to be mediocre; they could still be bad. They could still be a 6-11 team. But over 5.5, I think is just great value. I think everyone is just bored with them. They don't want to talk about them, and that's why their win total is so low. This team was 8-9 last year with a quarterback that they didn't like. A quarterback who, despite the fact that Sean Payton buries him, and everyone right now is burying him in Pittsburgh, had 27 touchdowns and 8 interceptions because it was all just manufactured from what Sean Payton could do. So I similarly, I just think they can be a very boring, safe team, and I think over 5.5, I think this is my favorite win total of the offseason. It's either this or Philly's under, depending on what number you get it at, because Philly's number has been steaming up. It's at like 10.5 or 11. Like, I got under 11 for minus 120 for Philly. They go 11-6 and I push. Like, I think that's a great under, but that's not what this podcast is about. But I would say over 5.5, Denver is my favorite win total.
So Denver's schedule, I looked at it while you were going on your little spiel there. Week 1 at Seattle, versus Pittsburgh, at Tampa, at Danny's Jets, versus the Raiders, versus the Chargers, at the Saints, Thursday Night Football, I should add, versus the Panthers. That's their September and their October. November is a little bit trickier because it's at Ravens, at Chiefs, versus Falcons, at Raiders. And that's one thing with Denver. The Raiders always seem to have their number. I don't know what it is. So week 5, that's already one of my bets, is to bet the Raiders. But there's a chance there that they're one of those teams that are, they stumble their way to like 4-4, 3-5, and everyone's kind of going like, oh, look at the Broncos. It's like, look at the little horse. It's getting the Broncos getting a bit of its swagger back. That's where I can see it being, because then, like I said, November's tough, and then December it's Browns, Colts, Chargers, Bengals, Chiefs to finish the year. So,
but I will say one thing in their favor, that second, and this I think does matter a lot. Their home game against the Chiefs is Week 18. it's very possible the Chiefs have things clinched by then. Patrick Mahomes didn't play in the Week 18 game last year.
Yes.
And the game's in Denver. Like, I think that matters a lot. Yeah, so I think that it wouldn't shock me at all if Denver is 5-11 going into that game. Mahomes isn't playing. It's their season finale. They're playing all the starters. They want to get a win to send the fans home happy, and then that could be their 6th win. But even then, I don't think it even has to get to that point because, like, when you were reading that schedule, all those like NFC South teams they can play, they can easily go 2-2 against that division. They could easily get 2 wins in their own division. Like, I'm not, none of these games intimidate me that much, like, going through the schedule. Like, only, like, even something like home against Cleveland, that's probably a loss. But if Deshaun Watson's a disaster, like, I don't think that's out of reach at all. Only, like, at Baltimore, at Cincinnati, like, at the Jets even. Like, stuff like that, fine. Those games are probably not winnable. But I think the rest of the schedule, I don't think it's hard to find 6 wins there. I like their over.
6-11, 7-10, I think is very plausible for a Denver Bronco team. You know, I just wasn't big on them just because I know Bo Nix has that narrative of him where he's been in college for so long. So I'll have to wait and see what happens. But that Week 1 game against Seattle is very intriguing too. Also, I'll say this right now about the Denver Broncos from a gambling standpoint. I think you bet their unders. You know, you just bet the unders. I can see them winning a lot of grimy, like 20-17 football games. You know, 20-24, 21, 24-20, like those, like just grind it out, like ugly football games. They might have a couple fun little sprinkles in there for overs, like Christmas Eve against the Pats last year. But besides that, who knows what they're going to do? Moving on to the AFC North, because obviously we're still waiting for someone to talk about the AFC East, and also we're talking save the best division for last. The Cleveland Browns are such an intriguing team this year because of like what Big Rat was saying with Deshaun Watson, where we don't know if he could be hurt, if he could be bad. Because for the first time, and since Deshaun Watson's become a Brown, it's no longer on the coaching staff. You're not firing Kevin Stefanski after becoming a 2-time Coach of the Year with your team. But I don't know how the rest of you guys feel, but are the Bengals being slept on a little bit too much? Or is it just me?
I think they're being slept on. Man. I just think with the injuries and stuff, and then missing the playoffs last year, like people aren't realizing like they're still a very, very elite squad. Who naturally should bounce back. I don't see why not. T. Higgins, he's got a contract year to play for. I know Griff is praying he's a Patriot next year, but we'll see. Jamar still hasn't reported, right?
He practiced. He showed up to practice.
He did
practice. It came out like today.
He's actually in drills though and stuff?
He's at the facility.
Because I know he's been holding in. No? So, I mean, with that headache, they do need him, obviously, but, they're still super talented. It was just injuries with them with what happened last year. So I expect them to bounce back, be in the playoffs and all that. Possibly win the division. I don't know. What do you guys have? Who do you guys have winning the division?
I got Baltimore, and it's no disrespect to Cincinnati. I understand the argument for the Bengals. It's very obvious. Joe Burrow was hurt last year. Nothing needs to be said. I will say I think we underrate just how often Baltimore wins when Lamar is there. Like I promise you get like any listener out there who thinks I'm exaggerating this, you can look this up. Lamar Jackson has a higher win percentage as a starter than Tom Brady. Like the Ravens never lose when Lamar is the quarterback, ever. Both times the Bengals won the division, both times Lamar Jackson was hurt in December. And for sure the first year, I don't remember the second year, but for sure the first year, the Ravens were actually ahead in the division before Lamar got hurt. And then Lamar got hurt and they missed the playoffs. So now, look, this is like even Tom Brady, he could win. They can win 10 games or 11 games and still lose this division. The Dolphins won 11 games last year and didn't win the division. So like I'm not saying that it rules out Cincinnati from going like 12-5 or 11-6 and still winning the division. Of course, that could still happen. But I'm going to trust the Ravens' health and trust that I think their losses are being a little overrated in the summer in terms of who they lost on their roster. Like losing Patrick Queen, I think that's fine. I think that's because I think that's what you do in the NFL. If you have like a really good linebacker that you draft in the first round, you play them on the rookie contract and then you watch them leave. Like I think that is fine personally. The guys they lost on the O-line, like John Simpson and Morgan Moses, like I get it, but their best O-line players are still Lyndon Baum and Ron Stanley, and those guys are still there. I think the receiver core is going to be the same or better. And it is forgotten that Todd Monken, like he had a good year with Lamar last year, but that was Lamar's first year with Todd Monken. Normally, guys grow in their second year, and they're normally not at their best in their first year. So, in my opinion, there's room for growth on offense, which I know sounds weird because Lamar was the MVP last year, but he was more so the MVP by default because there was not another good candidate. I mean, in my opinion, people should have just given it to Dak. It's actually surprising that I feel like everyone talks about how we over talk about the Cowboys. We always talk about the Cowboys. I think we kind of undercovered that Dak had 36 touchdowns and 7 interceptions last year. Like that's a classic MVP touchdown to interception ratio stat line. And they won the division and they were the 2 seed in the NFC. Like I don't know why that was undercovered, only because he lost to the Dolphins and the Bills in December, I guess.
And the fact he got his ass kicked in the playoffs.
Like but I feel like yeah, but that's
no, I know that. It's just that
playoff
before loss. People are just going to take what Dallas does in the playoffs and judge it for everything that it is.
Well, that's also why everyone's overrating Philly now, which makes no sense to me because Philly had an even worse loss in the playoffs to a worse team, and we've forgiven that. But the Cowboys loss we just can't get over. Like it is crazy. But so I think Baltimore rambled too much. I think they're going to be better on offense despite losing the guys in the O-line. I think their running back room is better. I think the receiver room is better. They're going to have Mark Andrews the whole year. Mark Andrews wasn't playing in December last year. People forget. It's the second year with Todd Monken. Just because they lost John Simpson and Morgan Moses, that's not enough to me to say this offense is going to be worse. I think the offense is going to be better. I think the defense is going to be a little bit worse. And I like the Bengals. I have a lot of respect for the Bengals, but I'm just going to trust that as long as Lamar is playing, they'll probably win the division. Because when Lamar plays,
so 2 things about the Bengals. One, Big Rat, you will be with me here week 6 for their Sunday football game against the New York Giants. But
hell yeah,
the big thing. I also have a very hot take about the Bengals. Call me effing crazy. Call me a homer. I think they lose week 1 to New England. I don't know why, but weird shit happens week 1. And New England this year, for as bad as I think they'll be, you got to remember, in 2020, Kansas City Chiefs and the 1-15 Jacksonville Jaguars had the same record against the spread at 7-9. Just want to point that out. And also, too, if Mitch Trubisky can go into Cincinnati 2 years ago and beat the same Bengals team coming off of a Super Bowl, Jacoby Brissett or Drake May could maybe do it. I don't know. It's just me hopeful thinking. Also, because I know Cincinnati, even last year too, Cleveland kicked their butt last year as well. But I do have the Bengals winning the division just because, like we were saying, Danny, for as good, I think it's just like it's a back and forth with these two teams. I think it's that like scoreboard watching for like what we saw with New England and the New England Miami game for 2019 with Kansas City. Where Big Rat's a difference. Like I could see it like being 11-6 and 10-7. That's what I can see Cincinnati and Baltimore being. But Cleveland is this ultimate wild card just because I was saying this to him while you were gone. For the first time in Deshaun Watson's Cleveland Brown tenure, it's no longer, hey, if you underperform, we're going to take a coaching staff. You underperform, you're probably going to be gone, and Cleveland's going to have to eat the money because you're really going to tell me that Cleveland's going to look at Kevin Stefanski. If Deshaun looks at the end of the year, it doesn't go well. He's going to go, I don't like Stefanski. Well, I'm sorry, Stefanski without you went to the playoffs and won Coach of the Year. So what's the excuse level there? My big thing, too, is I think this is the year that Pittsburgh finally falls off. I'm not a fan of the quarterback situation. I think defensively they'll be good, but like offensively you have a lot of question marks because like Najee Harris is going into that contract year. Pat Freiermuth, we'll see how he is. George Pickens, it's the same thing. Where is he disgruntled? Is he not? I just think eventually, something's got to give and the dam's got to break with the Pittsburgh Steelers.
And what the hell's going on with the Ayuk situation? That just completely went ghost. I thought they were like on the verge of getting him.
I just at this point it's going to be this week it'll be a random like a random Wednesday news dump. Hey, Ayuk resigns in San Francisco, 3 years, $125 million, 92 guaranteed, something like that.
It doesn't.
The way they were talking, didn't they? It kind of seemed like the Commanders had something ready for him with the Dotson trade, but I don't know.
Yeah. There was so reading between the tea leaves on it all. Ayuk wanted to go to either Pittsburgh or the Commanders. Like Pittsburgh, like Lord knows why. Like there could be all sorts of reasons. Like I know the Commanders, like he and Jaden Daniels, like played together in college. So, like that makes a lot of sense to me. So those are the two teams he wanted to go to. San Francisco didn't like the trade packages that those two teams had. So that's why they were strongly leaking. Like that report that came out that the Patriots and the Browns were on the verge of landing Ayuk, like a very clear, blatant leak by San Francisco to get Pittsburgh to give a better offer. And then it was like slowly released a few days later. Actually, Ayuk does not want to go to either place. I think now they're in a situation where they don't want to give Ayuk, they don't want to make Ayuk the highest paid receiver in the NFL, but they don't want to trade him to Pittsburgh for what Pittsburgh is offering because Pittsburgh is not offering George Pickens in the deal. And San Francisco, when they were going to trade him to Cleveland, the appeal was that they get Amari Cooper back in the deal. Or even New England, not that these are the same players, but that Kendrick Bourne would apparently come back in the deal, who used to be in San Francisco and knows the system and all that stuff. So it seems like they are a worse team this year if they trade him to Pittsburgh. But it's a question of, are they just forced to trade him to Pittsburgh because they have no other option because they don't want to give him the raise he wants? So I'm with Griff. I think at this point, I just don't think it's beneficial for anybody for him to get traded like this week. Like it's just he hasn't been practicing with the Steelers all summer, and then San Francisco has no replacement for him, and they're just going to be like a worse team this year when they're in a Super Bowl window. I just think at this point it's too late. They're not going to get the value that they thought, and they're either going to cave and give him the contract that he wants, or they're going to go into the season with him unsigned and just be really unhappy about it. And then franchise tag him next year and use that as leverage to do this shit all over again with threatening to trade him or not trade him or extend him, etc. But I think at this point, or trade Debo. I just Greg Rosenthal said it best. Like they're almost certainly a worse team if they get rid of him right now in any scenario, given the teams that he wants to go to. So if that's the case, they're better off just waiting a year because they might win the Super Bowl.
Because too with San Francisco as well, just to go off on the side subject. This really feels like an all-in year for the 49ers. You know, this seems like this is the now or never because next year I think there's going to be a lot of – I'm going to use the word mass exodus. I think there's a lot of guys next year that are going to be gone because guess what? Brock Purdy's going to get $60 million a year, and NFL Twitter is going to be scorched earth. Like, I'm not even afraid to say that. He's going to set the internet on fucking fire. The big thing with me with Pittsburgh is just that, like, they do it every year where it's just like, hey – they'll like them and the Saints do it. You know, they're 2-6. Oh, what happened? Oh, but hey, they kind of come down running down the tracks. Who is that? Oh, it's the Pittsburgh Steelers. They have an interesting schedule because they open up at Atlanta and then they go to Denver, as we were previously suggesting. But then I'm just gonna pull it up. They play versus the Chargers at the Colts. Week 5, Sunday Night Football at home against the Dallas Cowboys, which I know everyone's saying, oh, why is that Sunday Night Football game? That's a historic rivalry. Those get a pass. At the Raiders, which essentially is a home game for them. Week 7, Sunday Night Football against Danny and the Jets. Versus the Giants, which week 8, Big Rat, you and I. At Commanders versus Steelers, at Browns, at Bengals versus Browns. And then their last 4 games, including Christmas Day, at the Eagles, at the Ravens, versus the Chiefs, versus the Bengals. You don't want that if you're a fringe playoff team the last 4 weeks of the season. You're playing 4 dogs down the stretch. You're playing 4 teams who are probably gunning for divisions at that point or gunning for bye weeks. So, or not even bye weeks. You're gunning for a bye week at that point. So with Pittsburgh, that's where I worry, where I'm like, hey, you got to stack up. I know everyone says the season doesn't begin before Thanksgiving. We all know what coach was famous for saying that. Belichick. It's a Belichickian phrase. But in Pittsburgh's case this year, that's not the case. Pittsburgh has to stack wins against crappy teams when they can. But I can see a world where, you know, Pittsburgh's going to F around and find out, beat these good teams out of nowhere. They're going to beat Kansas City on Christmas Day, but then lose to, like, the Washington Commanders.
And with Pittsburgh, I know there's the aura of Tomlin, but I will say I would have never thought with the Patriots, with Belichick, it would ever have gotten as bad as it did last year. I would have just, sure, he didn't have the 500 streak that Tomlin has, but that 2020, people need to go back and look at that 2020 roster that went 7-9. Like, it is truly unbelievable. Like that was Cam Newton with Gunnar Olszewski, Damiere Byrd, and N'Keal Harry as his top receivers. Like, truly, like, everyone thinks their receivers are bad. They were much worse that year, and they just, through great coaching and grit and like metal, they like got that team to 7-9, and they beat some good teams that year. Like I just truly believe that with Belichick, it would never get that bad. And I think people out there who are like afraid to bet the Steelers under because of the Tomlin aura. Like, if Belichick is capable of having a 4-13 season, I see no reason why Tomlin can't either. And I'll give a great piece of betting advice to anyone out there. The moment they bench Russ for Justin Fields, like, everyone on NFL Twitter is probably going to be screaming to bench Russ because he's boring and he's taking too many sacks and the offense doesn't score. They're going to bring in Fields. People are going to get excited. People are going to be like, well, I'm not saying Fields is that good, but at least he can run. At least he brings some juice. The moment they start Justin Fields, slam their win total under that year. Slam it. The moment they bring him in, no matter what the number is. Like, everyone will overreact to that and assume that will make the team better. It will not make the team better. Justin Fields is not a good fit with Arthur Smith. He doesn't throw to the middle of the field very well. He's not a good fit behind this offensive line. He runs into too many sacks. He's late on throws. The occasional 50-yard scramble he'll give you, or the occasional 50-yard bomb that he throws to the air, which he can do. He's more than capable of. That's not going to offset the little ways he sets your offense back every week. And I think that's why, no matter how bad Russ has looked, they're still starting Russ, and they're hoping to God that Russ can save the season. Because I think everyone knows the moment they start Fields, the sacks are going to go up, the turnovers are going to go up, and they're just going to start losing games. So truly, like, the moment they start Fields, if their win total that year is like at 7, hit the under.
Yeah, the Fields hive is they are toxic, man. Even seen the preseason game where he like overthrew the receiver by like 8 yards or whatever, and they're like, oh, the receiver didn't jump high enough. I'm like, what are you talking
Anyway,
about, man?
folks, it's a great time to introduce our fourth guest. You know what? Bedtime past him. Greg Thompson at Cover One. Sir, we've discussed so far the AFC South, the AFC West, and the AFC North. Currently talking about the Pittsburgh Steelers, but how are you doing this fine evening?
Peachy doing really well. It's always fun getting kids to go to sleep. So we're finally
ready to roll. So we were just kind of talking about Pittsburgh, just to catch up to speed with the North and everything like that, because we're all kind of in the mindset this year that this is kind of the year that, you know, the dam finally breaks for the Pittsburgh Steelers and that they're no longer this like 8-9 story that comes alive. But then, you know, they lost to you guys in the playoffs this year, so you can kind of attest to that as well.
Yeah, so my longtime college friends fantasy league, we had our 19th draft yesterday. 2 of the guys are big-time Steelers fans, and both of them said, yeah, this is the year Tomlin Street comes to an end, and that it's the offensive line. There's going to be, I think the defense is still going to be tough. It's going to be, you guys will hear me say it when we get to the East, like, the Patriots aren't going to win a lot of games, but they're going to ruin a couple team seasons because that defense is going to be good enough that it's just going to mess up somebody. And Pittsburgh's going to be the same thing. Like, they're not going to do well enough to make it matter for them, but that defense is going to mess up somebody's season that thinks they're walking in to get a win, and that they're going to, you know, you can't, you know, make Fitzpatrick and T.J. Watt, and now add in, you know, Patrick Queen, and honestly, Keanu Benton's a stud and probably going to have a huge breakout season. But that offense is in big trouble because that offensive line got dog-walked, and we'll see. Maybe they're holding something back and going to, you know, surprise, you know, somebody here, but man.
And then with the other divisions quickly, with the South and the West, is there any predictions you have or any hot takes you have with any of those 8 teams? We started with the South, and we did South, West, North, East is our order.
So the South, my only hot take is, I'm not out on the Texans by any means, but like every year we have one of those teams that has an amazing run in one-score games, and it was the Vikings 2 years ago, and the Bears when Trubisky went 13-3, and that Stroud's the real deal. I don't think he's any kind of fraud, but you know, they always do that metric at the end of the year, like, hey, what would everybody's record be if you just flipped all the one-score games? They would have been 5-12. So, like, that's a lot of things that bounce their way, a lot of late-game things. So, they could have another really good season and go 9-8, and it would, like, everybody would be like, oh, my God, I can't believe what happened. But, like, they just had a lot of stuff bounce their way last year. So, they're super talented. I don't think they're going to fall apart. I don't think, like, all these people picking them as, like, their sleeper Super Bowl pick. And, like, there's a lot of stuff that's still got to come together for that team. I don't think it would be shocking at all if the Colts won the South. Out west is like the least mysterious division in football. Like I don't even know what to say. I'll pick against them. After I watch them dead and buried. It's like I used to say with Brady and Belichick. Like it's gonna be like a week after they lost, and I'm gonna check and be like, "Are you sure? Like, are you sure? Like, we're for sure that was real?" And then I'll pick against them. It'll be before I see it, and then, I don't really know. There's a lot of weird stuff in the North with, like we just talked about Pittsburgh. There's some weird stuff with like a wrist injury that the quarterbacks never had with Burrow, and Chase and Higgins are both unhappy with their contracts. There's just a lot of weird stuff that could go sideways quick that, I do think the Ravens lost a lot of talent in different spots, but there's a lot of stuff going the wrong direction there. And then Cleveland is, hell, maybe the best 52-man roster in the league. Like all the other positions except quarterback is so good that, like, if Deshaun Watson is even remotely adequate, but I live here in Cleveland. All of my friends here, most of them are all my adult friends and college friends are Cleveland fans. All of them want Jameis Winston. All of them want Jameis Winston to play from day one. No one wants to root for Watson. No one cares. They're just waiting for him to give up so that they can just have fun rooting for Watson. They know it'll be chaos, but it'll at least be fun.
Yeah, I did see someone from Cleveland, like a Cleveland sports fan, on my timeline, did say something along the lines of, it could be, because I guess there's smoke. You would know better than I would. I guess there's smoke in Cleveland about whether or not Watson even wants to play football, and something along that lines of an injury that's not really an injury that knocks him out of the lineup in like week eight or something in order to bring Winston in there.
I'm not going to pretend to know him as a person. It would not shock me. Like I don't know. That whole thing is so weird and it's hard. He's made it really hard to root for him. Like there are a lot of people that I knew that were like, hey, I don't need to root for the person to root for the team. If he's the best guy for the team, this is cool. I'll root for the team. We all know that like there are guys in each of our teams that aren't choir boys. Like, hey, I can separate that. Now you don't even have that. Like now their own fans are, I don't know anyone who isn't like outwardly rooting against him, and that's super weird. When it's like passionate fans of their own team, like no one wants him to do well, and that's a super weird spot to be in.
It's very interesting because I was also saying too, if Watson plays bad, it's not like he can go to ownership or management and be like, oh, we want the coach fired, because guess what? Your coach has won 2 head coach of the years and basically turned chicken shit into chicken salad last year and got to the playoffs. So you got no excuse. You got to go there and play well.
Yeah. They won games of 5 different quarterbacks. Yeah, he has
Kevin,
no leverage.
Kevin Stefanski also too is their best coach they've had since Bill Belichick. Let's be real.
And I don't know if I'm not saying it would be easy or something that Cleveland would want to do, but I think all of us, when Watson signed that contract, first thought, oh, you're screwed. You have to ride out that contract for 5 years, no matter what, because of the guarantees, etc. But then you have Denver like accepting an $80 million dead cap hit, and again, not easy, not
money.
Something that's like comfortable to do. But at least there's like now some precedent that like, oh shit, we have to burn $90 million of cap. Like it sucks, but it's not impossible.
Yeah. I was still open to when that first happened. I was even kind of not consoling, but I was like pitching it to my Cleveland friends of like, yeah, I get it. Like all this other stuff looks pretty terrible. That's going to be, not awesome to get your head around, but he's awesome. Like, did you watch what happened in Houston? Yeah. Like, this is one of the most dynamic, whatever you want to argue, top 5, top 10, whatever it was. Like, he was universally a top 10 quarterback, and like there were stretches in that playoff run where like, hey, like people would have picked him like, I don't know, like 3rd and stuff like that. That was a dynamic, game impacting player. And now, like, when's the last time somebody wasn't good for 4 years and then went back to being good? Like, it's just it'll be unprecedented if he gets it back and gets back to, and I don't know, anyone thinks he's going to be what he was, but gets back anywhere close to that. No one has ever gone.
It's weird to think there's a multiverse out there of Deshaun Watson versus Ryan Tannehill for the right to go play San Francisco in the Super Bowl 5 years ago now. Just think about that. There's a multiverse where that exists. Just wanted to point that out there.
And
Me and Big Rat were at each other's necks 2 years ago on getting Watson. It was between the Jets and the Dogs. We wanted him bad, you know?
because
Every
it's
team
almost
should have.
yeah, because it's almost lost to history that the scandal stuff came out after his trade request. At first,
Yep.
he requested the trade first before we knew any of that stuff. And at the time, it was the exact opposite of what the reaction ended up being. Like we were fighting each other about who's going to get him to the point where, like September, I'm like, because my team was heavily involved in that. It's part of the reason why Brian Flores is fired. It's part of the reason why Tua hates his guts so much that he'll light his head coaching career on fire in an interview with Dan Le Batard. It made our lives hell. Like I don't even have to root for him, but that 2-month period where I had to like seriously tangle with the fact that they might trade for him was torture.
I also did some stuff reading into that earlier this week, because I know Mike Florio was pointing out Stephen Ross would have done the trade if the court proceedings were all finished, but the court proceedings weren't, so Stephen Ross said, nope, we're not doing it. But you know what? Enough to Sean.
There's a whole bunch of teams who just barely made out. I have it on good record. Atlanta was ready to do an awful lot and just got saved by Cleveland coming in and be like, fine, screw it, we'll do 100% guaranteed. Like, they were ready to have, it was whatever. They were going to be like 190 million guaranteed out of the 230. It's not like they weren't like ready to give him everything that he was looking for. It's just they finally got, Cleveland came in over the top, but Cleveland coming in over the top saved 4 franchises that were ready to hitch their wagon to this guy, and now would be in the exact same like anchor around their neck spot.
And there was also a report that Philly, because this was after like Hurts only played like 4 games his rookie year. Philly was in talks to trade for him that summer, and Watson turned them down.
Yes.
Watson didn't want to go to Philly, which is just unbelievable to think about.
Well, and you talk about like if things had worked out quicker and happened differently, but you put like that roster around, like an awful lot of people look good with that roster.
And the way the Texans have turned it around, everyone was killing the Texans back then, like absolutely destroying them, and look how they made out. So
what that all turned into.
Karma worked out in its right way.
Well, hell, look at even like with Big Rat, like how crazy, like what the downstream, like total outcome of the Laramie Tunsil trade is ridiculous. Like it's an insane haul of things, and Houston is chock full of ridiculous young talent. Like, imagine if they hadn't have made that dude. If they had have kept all that things, or like it went the other way around. Like the fact that they still have this ridiculous treasure trove. Right now, if you were doing like a, like a Madden restart franchise, and you couldn't pick your own team, and you wanted to pick like the team with the most young talent, awful lot of people would pick Houston, and they also have a trade that ended up stocking like half the talent in Miami's roster in one stupid trade.
It really is funny, but you know what? Enough to Sean Watson talk, gentlemen. We got a rodeo of a division to talk about. Well, actually, 3/4 of a rodeo, because let's be honest, we all know who 4th place is.
Hey, every rodeo has a clown. Every rodeo has a clown.
Usually,
I'm going to go around the room because every team. Well, I'll save me for last. So we have every team here something to talk about. We have Big Rat team with its apparent coke dealing head coach. Greg's team, which I'm going to say something about Buffalo. Greg, I know everyone was kind of killing them for all the players they gave up, but you know what? I kind of applaud management for doing so, because they knew to move on. Hey, don't keep it on. Just try to patch and figure. No, hey, we got to cut players. We got to make room for cap. We go there. You're the capologist. You know the cap a lot better than I do, and that's that. And then with Danny, I don't want to say an all or nothing year for the Jets, but I don't want to say that for the fact that next year. Oh no, it's all or nothing for the fact that next year the Jets, they have 2 very big contracts they got to hand out. They have 2 very big contracts, probably 3 actually. Excuse me, they got 3 contracts next summer they got to pay. Breece Hall, Sauce Gardner, Garrett Wilson. So we'll see what happens. But one thing I also want to say, I'm also going to do a double dip with Greg. I know Bills Mafia is a great fan base because they wait in line at 6 o'clock in the morning at local Wegmans to get Fisher Price dolls of their favorite players that are meant for children. So,
listen, we don't have a lot. Let us.
We could have the draft in a few years.
Yeah, hey, I actually think we will. Like, there are some completely irrational fans who think they're going to put a Super Bowl in Buffalo. They can't. Like, I struggle finding a hotel I want to stay at when I go back home. They're not having a Super Bowl in Buffalo. I do think they'll have a draft. I think they'll be able to do a draft. It'll be cool. They'll be able to do it around the new stadium and all the tailgating and everything. That'll be cool. But yeah, like the Bills season, there were a lot of names that were lost. And some of it's very, like, I'm still uneasy about it because there's not an obvious replacement. The trouble is people see the names as those players in their peak value. Yeah. And even if all of them had stayed, they weren't going to be that in 2024 anyways. So moving on from how much money that was and just figuring out how to move forward, that was just forcing yourself to do it because you had to make that decision at some point anyways. So don't get me wrong, there's a lot of players that I invested a lot of time and energy in rooting for. It's not fun to have players like that walk out the door, but the guys who are replacing them probably are on par to what the 2024 versions of those guys would have been if they had stayed. It's not the downgrade many people see it as, but that also doesn't mean that it's the all-pro version of some of those guys when they were at their peak. I don't think we replaced that. So, it's definitely going to be an odd season in how many changes there are. There were so many years where Poyer and Hyde were like the centerpiece of that defense and everything kind of came back forward. Now there's actually a really nice rotation on the front end that's going to be pretty disruptive from a pass rush standpoint. Big Red will have to cloud the fanhood rooting for Greg Rousseau, but only the Canes version of him. But then all kinds of questions in the back end, and that's been like the strength of the defense forever. So it's going to be weird, but I still think it can be functional. And the same thing, there's no one on this offense as good as Stephon Diggs, but there's also something to be said of on 3rd and 7, like, everybody in the stands knew where the ball was going, but everybody in the defense knew where the ball was going. So, like, maybe there's something to, like, hey, you actually have to cover all the guys. And if we don't throw it to one of these guys, no one's going to yell at us on the sideline when we go back to the sideline. So we'll see. I think that it's right for people to have questions. I think that there's less security and less assurance of how I felt the last handful of years, but ultimately, we still got 17. I'll take our chances.
I just want to jump in quickly, Rat. Greg, your week 1 game fascinates the hell out of me. That game against Arizona.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun. I think Arizona's sneaky.
And also so the bottom screen's week 2 prime TV, and then week 3 prime TV.
Oh yeah.
We'll talk about this when we get to the Finns, but I think the week 2 game is like as big of a game as you can ever have in week 2 because the Bills won that division last year because they swept Miami. They had the same record, they had the same division record. They had to sweep Miami, not just beat them once, beat them twice. So week 2 Thursday Night Football, that's massive. And
super weird that it comes on like a quick short week too. I guess if you're gonna have a short week, like the time to do it is before
early.
All the mounting, little dings of the season come. So for both teams, it's better to do that right off the bat and get the short week out of the way. I don't think either team has a lot of short weeks, if any, the rest of the way. So it's nice to get that wrapped up, but it's still going to be.
Is that in Buffalo or is that in Miami?
It's in Miami. So it's in Miami, but you have to go to Miami in September, but it's a night game, so you get a little bit. It's still going to be. It's not like it's.
It's going to be humid.
It's not like cool and breezy at 8:00 in Miami. It's in September, but it's not 1:00. So.
But you don't want to lose that Buffalo cold game, so thank God.
So we get both. We get it's in Miami in September. It's in Buffalo, though it's not December. I think it's in November. It's not all the way late.
Yeah. November 3rd,
later, but not like winter. Yeah, it's not as late. Oddly, the Bills play the Patriots in week 16 and 18. Super weird.
And so I wanted to ask you about Diggs because I remember last year on this podcast it was almost like foreshadowing for our podcast. The 2 main topics we wanted to talk to you about were Diggs and Ken Dorsey, and that ended up being like 2 themes of the season because. So Diggs, because I'll just tell you as a fan, because I know that they would take on a huge cap hit by moving him. Like we had heard that from you and from other people forever. And that playoff game, because I'm reading a lot now about how well we kind of de-emphasized Diggs in the second half of last year. I know you guys talked about this core muscle injury that he had, and the playbook wasn't featuring him the same way. I understand all that, but I watched that Chiefs game and I saw Diggs get like 11 targets, and I saw Diggs get like 3 catches on 11 targets, and it was actually the first time that the Diggs Allen connection. I mean, I guess the easy thing to blame is Tyler Bass or the injuries on defense, but the Diggs Allen connection being pretty bad that game, I thought was a big part of the reason you guys lost. And it seemed to me, just watching that game, I remember I was with my buddy and I told him, man, I'm not sure Diggs is going to be here next year. Like, it seems impossible that they can move him because of the cap damage, but something just seemed broken there to me with very admittedly superficial information watching the game. And I watched your guys' episode when Diggs got traded. You guys did your natural venting, as you would at the time. And you even joked about, hey, maybe by September I'll be all sunny and shiny about it again. I just want to ask you, how do you view that move now, and how does it impact your view in the season?
So, it's one of those things where I still don't know that I take that back. I do know why. Like I don't understand the strategy in a vacuum, because at no point would you take a contending team, and even if it's we're called reset, reload, step back, whatever you want to call it, they made some adjustments, but it's not like they're spending every single dollar. We're gonna have no cap space. They're gonna be one of the highest cash spending teams in the league, and they have Josh Allen. So you're a contending team by any definition. It's not compared to the previous years of that team. It's compared to this year and the rest of the teams. They're contending. There's no chance you would ever describe as, in the prime of your franchise quarterback's career, a contending team, you're going to eat $31 million worth of cap space to get a future draft pick. Now, again, maybe that Vikings pick will be really nice. Maybe it's like the 40th pick overall, and maybe Diggs falls off shows more of his age, and maybe there was more to it than what we know. There's lots of stuff that in hindsight, maybe it'll make me feel better about it. But there's no scenario where all the things we currently have and that $31 million cap hit had Stephon Diggs on the team versus a $31 million hole that isn't Stephon Diggs, because it's not like we could use that cap space or that draft pick on other things. The team isn't worse than what they set out to be. It's just the fact that, that $31 million hold could have been Stephon Diggs, and now instead it's nothing. So next year it won't be nothing. We'll get that second round pick. It'll become a thing, and then we'll be able to go forward. And they'll get out of the contract earlier. So they did take all their medicine at once. So next year they'll be clean. So long term, there's probably dynasty fantasy football people listening. They're like, oh no, that's really smart. That's good long term strategy. Like, sure, it doesn't help me now. It doesn't make me feel better today. So all that said, there obviously was enough going on. So how much of that was him demanding a trade? How much of that was them getting sick of, what very obviously had to be a fair amount of, I don't want to say tolerating, but like just catering to a superstar. Like, he was a superstar player, and you cater to superstars. They cater to Josh Allen now. They, whatever the combination was of them getting sick of it, him demanding it, him and Josh falling out, and obviously they're going to pick Josh. Like, that's not a, if Tyreek and Mahomes fell out, like, they're going to pick Mahomes. Like, that's just what happened. You pick the franchise quarterback. So we're never going to know the full story, or not for a long time. We're not going to know the full story of exactly how much was why. So I accept the fact that I think Brandon Beane's a smart GM. He's not perfect, but he's smart. He's good. I don't think he would have done this unless he had to. So I'm going to trust the fact that he had to, and this is as good as it could be. You go back to that game you mentioned, the play that gets replayed over and over again is that long bomb that goes through Diggs' arms. Like, if he catches that ball, they probably win. Like, you're talking about, it's like first down at like the 17-yard line, I think they're down by 3, and you now have like first down to the 17 with like I don't know, it's like 2.5 minutes left. Like I'll take my odds. Josh Allen can score a touchdown from that spot. Like that's pretty decent chance that he can score a touchdown from there. So it's there's a lot of different reasons. I don't know. He is 30. Father Time's undefeated. I don't think he was exactly the same as he had always been, but he's still damn good, and he's still going to be good for Houston this year. So, I've accepted it. I've moved on just with the reality of it, but I also am not one of the people who's like clouding myself into, oh no, we're better without him. No, we're not. Like we're not better without him. We're still going to be fine. Like we're just still going to beat lots of people and score lots of points and have a lot of fun, but we're not better. Like we would be better if we had all the things we have now and him.
And the other. I just wanted to ask about McDermott because you mentioned the defense, and that's an argument I'm hearing a lot of people bring up. That like, I believe Damar Hamlin is a starting safety now for the Bills. Is that correct?
It's a definite maybe. I don't think anybody knows who the other safety is, but next to Taylor Rapp. But there's a very good chance it is Damar Hamlin. I would say he's the most likely candidate.
So it seems like a lot of the thesis of the season, because yes, in a way there's like a reload, whatever word you want to use. Like Griff lived through this with Brady. Like the quarterback is there for years, and the surrounding names that you're always used to hearing associated with the team, they change. It goes from like a Corey Dillon to like a LeGarrette Blount. Like, the names revolve around the quarterback. So it's natural that you would go through this transition. But it seems like while they are doing some sort of a preparation for the transition, they obviously still want to win a Super Bowl this year. It's Josh Allen's prime. It seems like the thesis of the season is we think McDermott can make this defense and this back second look better than they are and make it okay. Which is why I wanted to ask you, and I know I ask you this all the time, and you always tell me it shouldn't be a problem because Josh Allen and McDermott have a good relationship. Do we get to a point where if they go like 9-8 and the defense is average and they miss the playoffs or they lose in the wild card round, that we could see a change? Or is his job just that secure?
No, there's definitely a line. There's for sure a line. I've said multiple times that any coach who misses the playoffs in a healthy Josh Allen season should have their job questioned. Now, each step above there is a little bit more credit and a little more debatable. So if they don't win the division, they barely squeak into the wild card, and they're one and done, is that way different than missing the playoffs? Like, you're probably still asking some pretty hard questions. Now, again, you're coming off of 5 straight playoff period, 5 playoffs in 6 years, 4 straight divisions, 4 straight seasons with a playoff win, the highest winning percentage in franchise history, like a lot of cachet built up. So I don't know where it is, but anywhere above there, like if they win the division again and lose, or like win in the first round, lose in the division game again, a whole bunch of people will be calling for its head because it's not progress. But if they keep winning, like this is making the owner a lot of money. It's got to be pretty bad. So again, missing the playoffs with a healthy Josh Allen, totally within question, and I wouldn't even put up a fight. The only other thing is a falling out between Sean McDermott and Josh Allen. Because I think there's a lot of people, even fans of the Bills, and lots of people outside of there who see, most people assume that like the head coach reports to the GM, or that a lot of teams the GM is like the more powerful person, short of the like super high, the McVays, the Shanahans, the guys who are Reed, the guys who are like really prominent. I don't think it's by a lot, but if you ask me, like I think it's 51-49 McDermott over Bean, and that Terry Pegula very much values the fact that Sean McDermott turned this franchise around, and then Brandon Bean hit on Josh Allen. And he gets a lot of credit for that, but Sean McDermott's the one who turned the franchise around and took it from being a perennial loser and the longest playoff drought in history. So the only person who has the power to supersede that is Josh Allen. So if Josh Allen got to the point where he's like, hey, I can't do this, you would force me to want to question if I want to stay here or not if you don't change coaches. He's the only person, I think, with the power to do that. I have not seen anything that makes me think that's even remotely in play or possible, but that's the only scenario where I could see it is either, honestly, it's probably a combination, that a season goes bad enough where that becomes a topic, and then that would be why. It wouldn't just be a bad season. It would be a bad season that made Josh Allen lose confidence, which would make Terry Pagula lose confidence. I take that combination, which I don't think is like super likely, but also is a non-zero chance. Like that's possible.
So my big thing with all this is with the new stadium coming in a couple seasons too, and when there's a guy drunk off a skunk off a blue or blue light walking into the new club seats in the Paul Pleasant, New Jersey, who's going to be the head coach?
There's a Paul Pleasant, New Jersey, like 4 feet to my right now. I could put it on while we're talking. I could grab it. I could grab a Paul Pleasant, New Jersey.
I saw it on Twitter the other day because I know the Bills basically announced, like, hey, this is what the clubs are like. The club seating is going to look like under the stadium, and someone basically just referenced, like, yeah, the random drunk guy walking in from the tailgate off Abbott in a Paul Pleasant, New Jersey, who's like 10 beers deep walking in there, who just looks out of place. I love all your points, Greg, about that, because at the end of the day, I think if Sean McDermott ends up being let go, it's not a Bean call. It's either a Josh Allen call or a Terry Pagula via Josh Allen call. I don't, like, Bean and McDermott seem like two peas in a pod, no pun intended. It just seems like there's a cohesiveness there.
I don't think it would have to be. I don't think it would have to be both, but I think people underestimate the fact that if it gets to the point where McDermott is losing his job, it very much could be a clean slate, and they would just bring in a new GM and coach. I don't think it's this, like, for some reason, people feel like Bean has way more job security than McDermott, and I think they both have a fair amount of it, but I don't think Bean has more job security than, like, he picked the golden goose. But, like, beyond that, like, his record's not unquestionable. Like, he's made some questionable, like, he picked the guy. It's awesome. Like, he gets a ton of credit for that. But, like, you know, beyond there, he's got some questionable things.
I wasn't trying to say that in the sense of, like, where I meant, like, two peas in a pod, like, the two of them get along. There's no, like, awkward friction there, like, kind of, unlike whatever the hell's going on with your former cohorts in northern New Jersey right now with the Giants. But with the Bills, I just feel like going into that new stadium, they're going to want a winner. So that's why I feel like it's more important that even so this year, I'm not saying they punt on the season, but say even if they get in the playoffs and, you know, it's a one and done, I think it is what it is. I think most fans, like, if that happens to Buffalo this year, I don't think a lot of the fan bases, there's going to be fan bases going to be upset, but I don't think it's going to be calling for their jobs in their head. Meanwhile, next year, you have the elements of the final year inside Highmark, Blue Cross, Rich Stadium, Ralph Wilson Stadium, New Era Field, et cetera, before moving across the street.
Rich Stadium, that one made
that's what my mom calls it. She saw, I think my mom saw the Rolling Stones or Elton John there, I think like in the 70s or something like that. But with that, with next year with the new stadium, I think it just adds the emphasis that you want a winning formula going into a new building to help sell tickets, to help, you know, because I know PSL has been a big issue there. I know there's been a lot of taxing issues and stuff like that with the local economy. Shout out Joe for that one. But with this year with Buffalo, I think if this might be a bit of a crazy take, but this feels like a year where if it were to happen, this feels like a crazy year that this could be the year that if Josh Allen does the opposite of what everyone thinks, that there's regression and leads them to the division title, has an amazing year. Who's to say this isn't the year that he finally cracks the code and gets the MVP? I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I feel like this may be a better year than ever for him to win it, because now he's proven, but he doesn't have anything around him, so it's truly up to him to get it done. Meanwhile, on the defensive side of the ball, I love that you guys promoted from within for defensive coordinator. I'm blanking on his name right now. I know he was your linebackers coach before. Yeah, Bobby Babich. But even as a Patriots fan, I'll admit that Matt Milano loss sucks for you guys. Like, it's just not one of those ones you don't want to see or have a team go through. But at the end of the day, I was looking at the schedule right there for Buffalo too. I noticed a little wrinkle that I found interesting, and it's that you guys play Kansas City, and that you don't play another AFC team until you play the Patriots Week 16 at home. Because they play the 49ers, Rams, Lions.
There's like a front-loaded part that's really nasty, and then there's kind of like not easier, but like it's still a first-place schedule, so there's not a lot of like easy games. But there's a little bit of a lull in the middle, and then it kind of hits a couple again at the end.
Danny, you got any questions for Buffalo?
So basically, I just want to know what your expectation is out of the year. Like, do you have a record prediction yet, or what?
I think the over/under team win total is pretty close. Like 10.5 is about right. I think they could do 11-6. Like I think that's doable. And again, it's it's no different than all the years where like, oh, okay, this is the year the Patriots are going to take a step back. I know, they still got Brady, but they had so many other changes. They lost so many other people. Like, we still got Josh Allen, and you guys don't. That's it.
Division's better now.
That's it. Like, there's not a ton else that goes into it. Like, we have the dude, and like, I don't think it's going to be as pretty. And what Griff had brought up here, the MVP is a narrative award. It's writers voting by what's there. So one, you have some other places where like some of the credit you're not sure. When Brock Purdy has an awesome season statistically, it was amazing last year. But like, well, how much is Shanahan and how much is McCaffrey and how much is the other talent? And you have different spots like that. Like in Buffalo, like he gets all the credit. He's the guy, and the expectations are lower. Like rightfully, like the Dolphins and the Jets are both awesome rosters. Like there's legit questions. Lots of people picking them to win the division with like sound logic of why. So if they don't and he wins, it's going to be because of him. Like it's going to be super easy to rally around that big. Oh my God, look at what he dragged that roster to. Even though it's not as bad as what people are making it out to be, but he's going to get all the credit, and it's going to look like this heroic effort. It's a super. I actually think it's a smart bet. Like if you think if obviously if you think they're going to fall apart,
plus 800 on FanDuel,
but that's the kind of spot where you do. That's the kind of spot where you do win that award.
Well, and, Mahomes has 2, Lamar has 2. Like you throw in the why if Josh Allen's in that tier, why has Josh Allen never won one? And then
Same
the narrative.
Jordan didn't win one every year. Like sometimes voters just kind of look for somebody else to vote for.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
So yeah, right now I would say 11-6. I think it's very possible that the top 3 teams of this division are all within a game of each other, and it's literally coming down to the final week or two and the weird tiebreakers and
like last year,
stupid conference records and point score, like all kinds of stupid stuff. It's very, very possible. But like there's 4 years of history that's gonna let me say like, well, I'll believe somebody could beat him when they do it.
That's very fair. I like that a lot.
That's fair.
Because this man has to be up very early tomorrow morning, we appreciate him for being on as long as he has. Big Rat has a 4:30 a.m. alarm set for tomorrow. Big Rat, what can you tell us about the 2024 Miami Dolphins?
Yeah. It's okay. I'll probably inevitably stay for the Jets convo because I can't let Danny get his BS off without some responses. The Dolphins, man, the Dolphins. It's funny. There's a lot of hype locally. Like I would say even more hype locally than there was last year. But nationally, the expectations are a little bit lower. I say a little. I don't want to overstate the no one believes in us card. But there is, like, statistically, the Jets are a shorter favorite to win this division than we are. Like, most playoff predictions I've seen have the Dolphins and the Jets about neck and neck. I've seen some people put, I would say about 60% of the predictions put the Jets as the higher of the 2 wildcard teams and the Dolphins as the lower of the 2. But in general, most people, I think most people kind of think the Dolphins are now like the Marvin Lewis Bengals. And I, as a fan, am not denying that is not possible at some point in my life. Tua and Mike McDaniel have played 1 playoff game together. 1. And we're coming up with an awful lot of conclusions about what their conclusive history is off that one playoff game together. Mike McDaniel's other playoff game with Miami with Skylar Thompson, I understand the stat sheet was not pretty. They were 13-point underdogs, and they had the ball down 3 at Buffalo, like the year before. And they had a 4th and 1 at midfield that got backed up because they couldn't get the play in on time. Turned it into a 4th and 6, didn't convert, game over. Like, I remember Miami last year in Buffalo, at Buffalo, 32-29, a great, close, competitive game. Both teams playing really well. It was on primetime. Everyone watched it. It was on the road. It was fucking snowing during that game. The Dolphins offense played very well, but the most recent image everyone has is that Chiefs
We're getting frostbite.
and coalesced. coalesced with the Bills game the week before as well. I understand that. But all I hear when I hear people talk about this team is they can't be competitive with a great team on the road and they can't win in the cold. So what does it matter? I've heard a few people say, I like them. They have a good offense. But if they had to go at Buffalo, at Baltimore, at Kansas City in the playoffs, I don't think they could do it. Most teams can't do that. Yeah. Like what the Chiefs did was super fucking rare. Like most teams need to have home field advantage throughout the playoffs to get to the Super Bowl. Like that's not uncommon for any era in NFL history. I did the math in the conference championship games over the last 11 seasons. The home team is 17-5. 17-5 across the AFC and the NFC. Whoever has home field advantage in the conference championship game usually goes to the Super Bowl. I do not know, yes, the Dolphins probably need to go win 12 games and be the 1 seed to go on a Super Bowl run. Sure, the Dolphins maybe are less likely to win a road playoff game at Arrowhead compared to Josh Allen. I understand that. It is still a really hard thing for any contender to do. I do not know why the goalposts have shifted so much that in order for the Dolphins to prove themselves, they have to beat a great team in the cold. It has to be December. If they beat a great team in September, like when they beat Baltimore in 2022, that doesn't count. It has to be a great team in December, and it has to happen multiple times. This does not feel like a fair standard. This does not feel congruent with how we talk about football. So I feel like a lot of the reaction from that Chiefs game has kind of colored the discussion over the summer. And in terms of the roster itself, the offensive roster is better, period. This is the beauty that I'm realizing now as a fan that none of you three have that I do. When my offensive coordinator is revolutionary, we get to keep him. No one gets to hire him. No one gets to steal Mike McDaniel, and then you predict the regression for the Dolphins like you would for Tampa Bay when they lose Dave Canales. That doesn't happen to us. We just get to keep McDaniel. Tough. Tyreek Hill is still here. I do not know why people fight about who the best, I see a bunch of, people put Tyreek, in a tier with, Jefferson and Lamb and Chase in terms of the top receivers in football. Tyreek Hill had back-to-back 1,700-yard seasons, something that's never been done in NFL history. Jerry Rice never did it. Randy Moss never did it. This is the best receiver in football, period. It should be obvious. It should be like Mahomes for the quarterbacks. It should be that level of obvious that, we don't have to, with all due respect to Jefferson, Lamb, and Chase, we don't have to debate it. We don't have to discuss it. It's just obvious. He is number one, and that's it. And so last year, everyone, I think, ignored, for as loaded as Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle are, that the Dolphins don't have any good tertiary receivers. They didn't have another receiver get more than 300 receiving yards last year, besides Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. I didn't say 500. I didn't say 700. I said 300.
That's
most of your...
That's wild.
Yes. They had no one. Kendrick Bourne healthy would have been awesome for the Dolphins last year. They did not have a third receiver that they could rely on. Why does that matter? Because 4 of the last 5 games last year, one of Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle doesn't play. Jalen Waddle didn't play in that Bills game that they choked. You never hear that discussed, ever. It was Tyreek Hill, Chase Claypool, Braxton Berrios, River Craycraft, and Durham Smythe. And then on the last play of the game, Tyreek Hill got hurt when Tua threw the pick to Claypool. Bad throw, bad decision, not defending it. But on that play, Tyreek Hill wasn't even on the field. It matters. It's why I think when people, diminish Tua's success, because they're anybody can win with that offense, we don't have a good O-line. Every other overrated quarterback in my lifetime is usually overrated because their O-line is great. That's not true in Miami. That's never been true in Miami. So you can't use that like you can in Philly, like you can in Detroit. You can't use that argument down here. And furthermore, I think we underrate just not having any competent tertiary receiver or even a tight end like Durham Smythe, God bless him, is the 32nd ranked tight end in the NFL in terms of receiving production, and he was the number 3 option in our offense. So when we get guys like Jonnu Smith and Odell Beckham, it's not that I think either of those guys are going to be revolutionary, but when I try to convey to people, they just need to get 500 yards. I've seen people flatten the OBJ acquisition with that line. Oh, he's probably going to disappoint, miss some games, and have 550 yards. That'd be great. We didn't have that. You don't know. These people don't understand how bad it was. They're so focused on panning Tua and talking about how loaded this offense is. They had no one outside of their top 2 last year to where you double cover them on third down and no one else is open. Or you have games that Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle miss, and now the receiving core is not as good. So the running back room doesn't need to be explained. I think everyone knows it's deep, it's good. The receiver room, I think, is better. The O-line is probably going to be worse, sure. Losing Robert Hunt matters, sure. The Dolphins have always had like the 25th ranked offensive line. You have to tell me with conviction, I think losing Robert Hunt is going to take you guys from the 25th ranked line to the 32nd ranked line, and the 32nd ranked line by a distance, for me to think it's actually going to materially going to matter. I'm not denying that, like people also don't know, Robert Hunt didn't play the last 6 games last year. When they were losing to the Ravens, losing to the Bills, you guys are frauds, you guys are chokers. Robert Hunt didn't play in either of those games. So I don't see why the circumstances are worse than what they were in those games that they are penalized so much for. And
genuine question: how have things looked with the Brewer? How has he looked? I know there were some questions on like he was better maybe in space than Williams, better moving, but maybe not as good of an anchor. How has that looked so far?
Yeah, it's been a mixed bag because he got hurt like 2 weeks ago. So he missed the last half of training camp. He missed both preseason games. But at the start of training camp, the reports were exactly what you would expect. He beautiful in the run game, like very mobile, like gets to the third level, like really, really quickly. And currently, his reps against Zach Sealer and Calais Campbell have not gone well. Those guys, I think those guys are both really good. I don't think there's any shame in that. But yeah, it is a concern of pass blocking on the interior when it comes to teams with strong D-lines. It's definitely a concern against Buffalo, like no doubt. Like Daquan Jones ruined the Dolphins in the first game they played last year in September, like going against Liam Eichenberg the whole time. And there's currently doubt as to whether or not Aaron Brewer is going to play in the opener. I think he's going to play, but it's currently up in the air. So I would say it's a mixed bag. It still needs to be proven. And I'm not denying that the O-line is worse. I just think people forget that it's been bad. Like, it's been bad the whole time. Like, yes, like maybe they are really the 32nd ranked O-line, and I'm coming on here next year after the Dolphins went 8-9, and we're like, yeah, I guess the line got so much worse that it made the difference in the offense being good or not. But I'm just not compelled. I'm going to need to see that because I've only seen Tua play with bad O-lines his entire career here. He gets the ball out really quickly. They don't put any of the action up the tackle between the tackles. They put everything outside for a reason. That maximizes those guys' strengths. Like, I would just need to see it more convincingly, especially in the regular season. In the playoffs, I'm with you there in the sense of everyone has to hold on to the ball longer in the playoffs. It's just kind of how it goes. So at some point, you can't hide the O-line forever. I do think that's an actual flaw in the Mike McDaniel system. That's not Tua. That's not their play calling. It's just thinking you can get away without having a good O-line. That definitely could be like a thing. But I would just need to see it in the regular season first as we're previewing the regular season and whether or not they can go 11-6 and win the division when they won 11-6 last year.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, that the combination of having the people dismiss the potential that you do win enough games in the regular season. That yes, the regular season doesn't supersede the playoffs. It doesn't matter more. But if you do well enough that you win the division and get the 1 seed, all of a sudden your odds in the playoffs change, and your the weather, your comfort level, all those things change, and all of a sudden now you're put in a better position to potentially succeed in the playoffs because of the regular season. That part matters.
And one thing to their benefit, like everyone talks about not beating the great teams. I say great and not good because 5 of their 6 losses last year were to Kansas City, Buffalo, and Baltimore. Those were the 3 of the 4 best teams in the NFL. That was who they kept losing to. Not the 10-7 Steelers that wasn't on their schedule. The 9-8 Bucks that Houston beat both of those teams. And to Griff's point, to Greg's point, that's part of why people are overrating them. They beat those 2 teams, and they get credit for beating good teams. The Dolphins would have beat both of those teams too. That's not the level of Kansas City, Baltimore, and Buffalo. That was a different tier of good team in terms of an actual Super Bowl team rather than teams like that. Like, they beat Dallas at home. It's more impressive to beat Dallas than it is to beat Pittsburgh or Tampa Bay or the Rams or any of those other teams. So, like, I feel like that narrative about Miami is not based. They were 4-3 against teams with a winning record the year before in 2022, beating Buffalo, beating Baltimore, beating Detroit when Detroit started getting good. Detroit put up 30 against us. I do think the defense, which I'll try to not be as long-winded on that as I was with the offense, people have pointed out they lost a lot of guys on defense. They have. It's kind of like what Greg said, though. but to a different level, I would say. It's not just that some of those guys are past their prime. It's some of those guys didn't impact the game the way most people think. It is a miracle that Brandon Jones got a 3-year, $20 million deal with Denver. Like I am shocked. He was not starting. He was not going to start here this year. It's a miracle that Denver gave him that contract. They got rid of Emmanuel Ogbah. They brought him back. He's looked great in camp. He looks more like he did under Brian Flores' system the first 2 years, by all reports. So not worried about that in terms of edge rusher insurance. Losing Christian Wilkins matters. Christian Wilkins was an excellent player. I do not think it was wise to give him $27 million a year because the NFL is telling you loud and clear, receivers might as well be quarterbacks. Like, you're giving receivers $30, $35 million, $40 million now. Like, that's what the NFL is telling you is what matters in terms of how you build your cap. So if you're going to pay Tua and you're going to give Tyreek and Waddle, Tyreek $30 million, Waddle $25 million, you have to make wise decisions on where the money goes. And what Chris Greer has emphasized over and over again, he will pay tackle, he will pay edge rusher, he will pay cornerback. He won't pay anything else. That's why he couldn't come to an agreement with Wilkins. That's why, as much as it pains me to say, it wouldn't shock me if Javon Holland is not a Miami Dolphin next year because he's not at one of those positions. And I know he's great. They couldn't agree on a deal. They will probably franchise tag him. They'll probably play the same game they played with Wilkins for a year. But eventually, they'll get to a point where they have to pay Jalen Phillips too. And even if you think Javon Holland is a better player than him, he might be. Jalen Phillips' position, they think, impact winning more. And that's kind of how they go about their decisions. So for this upcoming year with the defense, losing Christian Wilkins does matter. I'm not stupid. I can't predict Calais Campbell to play 17 games and be the prime version of Calais Campbell all 17 games. That's insane. Obviously, losing Christian Wilkins matters. But I do think replacing Xavier Howard with Kendall Fuller is 1-to-1, if not an upgrade. Most of the stats say that Kendall Fuller was the better cornerback of the two at this point in their careers. So I don't think that's a big deal. I think swapping out Jerome Baker for Jordan Brooks, similarly, lateral move. Like, they both got similar contracts. The Dolphins and the Seahawks basically traded them to each other. Don't think that's going to be a big needle mover. The big one that people always mention was Chubb and Phillips. And Danny could tell you, I've been telling Danny for months, Jalen Phillips is going to play week 1. I could almost hear myself yelling into my headphones when I would listen to a podcast talk about who knows when Chubb and Phillips are going to come back. Phillips is going to play week 1. Phillips is going to play week 1. We've known that here for 8 months. We've known that the whole time. He's not even on PUP. He participated in 3 weeks of training camp. Not even going into the season on PUP. Like, he's going to play week 1. He's probably going to be fine. He looks great, according to what all the reports say. Chubb is different, and that certainly matters. It's probably going to take him probably 4 or 5 games, I would say, to come back. But Phillips is going to play week 1. Ogbah's look better. I think they're worse at D tackle, and I think that's about it. I think every other position on defense, they're the same or better. Jordan Poyer, to Greg's point, he's not going to be the prime version of Jordan Poyer. He's made a big impact down here. All the DBs can't stop talking about him. Can't stop talking about all the leadership.
The leadership's still real.
And that does matter. He did kind of trash last year's team, but that's fine. We can deal with that. We can handle that. And he is going to play in a sub-package role. He's not going to play every down. That's why they have Marcus May. That's why they have Elijah Campbell. Like, he is going to play a lot. Like, he's probably going to play in that Bills game on Thursday Night Football, of course. But yeah, I think
he basically became like our dime linebacker towards
the
end. They would put a faster guy back in like the deep third, and instead of running nickel, they would take one of the after Milano got hurt, they would take one of the like run thumper guys off and put him down there in the box, and he was awesome. And
Dolphins for the most part, like they almost never put 3 linebackers in the field anymore. Like, not even on like standard running downs. Like, with their current personnel, they've almost never done it because they trust that all their safeties, Javon Holland being another example of this, they trust that all their safeties are going to cover up in the run game really well, that they only really see it as a liability. They might only keep 4 linebackers, which would be low for them or most NFL teams, but we'll see when the 53 comes out. They very well might only keep 4 linebackers total. And so I think with Anthony Weaver, I think the defense is either going to be the same, maybe a little better, maybe a little worse, but I don't think it's going to be a needle mover either way because this defense hated Vic Fangio, hated his guts. They celebrated when he was fired. They can't stop talking about how much they didn't like him. You guys think Tua went crazy by saying Brian Flores was a terrible person? Javon Holland said Anthony Weaver is actually a good person. He effectively said the same thing. It just didn't get nearly the same amount of attention. They hated that guy. It wasn't a fit. Maybe he still has it. He's still a great play caller. His heart just wasn't in it because he wanted to be in Philly the whole time. He's from Philly. Maybe that's all it is. Maybe it's not anything deeper than that. Whatever the case may be, I say all this to say, I think the Dolphins are probably going to be a similar team. I think they're going to go 11-6. They're going to be really consistent against the sub 500 teams that have no shot at covering the offense. They're probably going to go 11-6 or 10-7, and they're going to be a similar team. But I think depending on how many games they win, people are going to have different evaluations of their ceiling, even if they're the same team. I don't think they have to prove anything drastically different. I think they have to just be a little more consistent, get more experience in these spots. And that Bills game week 2, I'll say it now, if they beat Buffalo week 2, I think one of my team or Danny's team is going to win the game. Because I think if Buffalo loses a game to Miami, the math gets really tight. Like, it gets really tight in your guys' favor. Because for whatever you say about the Dolphins, when they play all these bad teams, they're not just winning, they're covering. They're covering 2 touchdown spreads consistently. Last year, they're dominant at home under Tua. That Bills loss is so out of the norm. So I think Buffalo needs to win that week 2 game to win this division. Because if the Dolphins win that game, I think it'll be hard for Buffalo to do what they did last year and go 11-6 and still win the division if they go 1-1 against Miami.
One of the biggest factors in the finishing first in the division each year is all the games that are the same between all the other teams. Like, we all play the same, AFC division. We all play the same NFC division. But our extra team for everybody for us is the Chiefs and the Ravens and like the other number 1 teams. Like, that all of a sudden becomes a factor. Like, those things really do start to matter.
And the only other like AFC superpower that people are afraid of is the Bengals. But because they came in 4th last year, the Dolphins or the Jets don't have to play the Bengals. Griff's team gets to play them. So
week 1, baby.
I think they're going to be a good team. I do think they need like their offensive line to play better and Tua to play better against some of these good teams in the road? Yes. I think saying it as far as to say they're incapable of it when they did what they did, Buffalo 2022 in the cold, I just think that's too far. I would need to see them lose like multiple more times consistently for me to really believe, okay, it's just never going to get there. Like, I've seen enough.
My $1 million question with the Dolphins is Mike Daniels' job security if they can't win a playoff game. That's my $1 million question, because I know he's been a revelation for them. I know he's been this great identity seeker for them. He's developed this like South Beach swagger, but when eventually is not winning in the playoffs, especially for as long as it's been since the Dolphins have won a playoff game, going to cut it where if they go this year, they end up losing in the wild card again. What happens then after this year if that happens? That's just my big question.
I think it's a fair question. Like, there will be like people who wonder, like, will Steve Ross get agitated and make a decision like that? But I think to the point of firing, I think too far. Because I think that this team, like, Steve Ross is dancing every time Jalen Waddle scores a touchdown. Like, this team is fun. They're selling out games. Like, despite what people think about like Miami fan bases, like, they're doing record attendance numbers right now. Steve Ross is having fun. They're winning. They've had 4 straight winning seasons. Only Kansas City and Buffalo have won more often than the Dolphins. Like, they've done really, really well. That I think it would like the Marvin Lewis. It's like the Marvin Lewis thing. How long does Marvin Lewis lose until you're just convinced that it's just never going to get better? It took like 4 playoff losses, 5 playoff losses, 6 playoff losses. If Mike McDaniel's gonna just if they like go at Baltimore and they lose like 24-10, I don't think that's enough. Especially because everyone in Miami knows this O-line is still not good. It's never been good, and that's always the thing you can point to. Like, Tua got paid, and no matter what you think about him, he got paid. He's here. He's not going anywhere. Like, I don't think Steve Ross would fire the guy who made the playoffs 3 straight years when they made the playoffs like 4 times in the previous 20 years before that. I struggle. I think it sounds crazy, but the reason I asked Greg about McDermott is because McDermott's kind of at that level where you give them a taste of playoff success often enough, and then they start to wonder, when's the big one coming? When's the Super Bowl one coming? Like that the expectation gets raised in terms of, can you get to that level? Like, I don't think the Dolphins are quite there where losing in the first round would come off sour. Like, obviously, everyone's antsy about it. They're in their own heads about it. They can't stop talking about it, winning the first playoff game in 24 years and all that stuff. But I don't think everyone will be pissed. Everyone will be sad. Everyone will be like writing firing articles. But I don't think McDaniel would ultimately get fired. I think he's too productive to the organization. They win too much. Someone else will hire him immediately. They win too much. Everyone's having fun. Steve Ross is having fun. I just can't see it.
That's all I want to know.
And especially because the offense, even though the offense is the problem in these games, the offense is never the problem during the whole year. This was the second-ranked offense in the NFL last year. Second. You could take out the 70-point game, and their metrics would still rank top 5. That has to matter. Like, there's no such thing as doing that every year, but it's actually fake. No. It's too early. It's too early for that.
I'm going to do a twofer here quickly. I'm going to let Danny say his spiel about what he thinks about Miami, and then you know what? We're going to take flight right away with Danny. All
right, yeah. No, I'm trying to be quick, honestly. So Miami, obviously, I have respect for them, but at the same time, like, just do it already. All you guys do is talk. You had the division. Like, it would have to take an impossible fuck up to fuck up the division last year, and you guys found a way to do that. So until you got.
Hey, don't you badmouth Will Levis.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like until you guys can just cross the finish line, like, I don't want to hear anything about Miami. I'm not buying into Miami until I see it physically. But, all your points you just made, you're valid, correct. But you're not selling me, unfortunately. That's all I have to say about Miami.
I'll just, before we will go to the Jets, I promise. And I don't even want to counter what he said because I agree with him. But I just want, like, what I think Dolphin fans don't appreciate is that, like, I've already seen the goalpost move a lot for the Dolphins, like, as I talked about at the start of this. Dolphin fans need to know it's going to keep happening until they win a Super Bowl. You win a playoff game. Like, the Cowboys have won playoff games, and everyone rags on them. Haven't been to a conference championship game in 30 years. That's the thing with them, right? And then you get to the conference title game, like Lamar Jackson has. Can Lamar Jackson do it in the playoffs? He had 4 touchdowns against Houston in the playoffs. 4 touchdowns. This Houston team that everyone loves, Lamar had 4 touchdowns against them. And they lost it's just like Peyton Manning back in the day. They lost the next week, and the most recent game is what matters. And then it became, can Lamar get it done? You have people saying this about San Fran, a team that's been in the Super Bowl twice. It will never end. Like, there's so many Dolphin fans that, like, if we beat the Steelers in the wild card round, we'll earn their respect. Fuck no. The goalposts will move again and again and again.
Yeah, until it's a ring.
Ring culture, man.
It's a ring, it won't matter.
Thank you.
All right, so my New York Jets, man. Where do we start? So obviously I came on here last year, blowing my trumpet, like, everything's great, everything's gonna be fucking phenomenal. But there were legit still holes in the roster, and you saw that. Unfortunately, I was there live. 4 plays in, lost my quarterback. The hopes and dreams were, crushed. Whatever. The positives about that were those holes became, Aaron Rodgers couldn't cover those up anymore. They were legit holes. I think there was 13 different offensive line combos that they played, which was a league high. So they addressed that this year, which I am so thankful that Tyrone Smith, for whatever reason, decided to call the Jets himself and say, you know what, I'm going to take this weird 1-year deal that he had no business taking. He should have got a Trent Williams deal, no doubt, because they're kind of the same injury. I mean, obviously Tyrone's missed a lot more games than he has, but they're on the same level of a tier of a player. John Simpson, very underrated signing that Aaron Rodgers has praised all training camp. You got my boy, Greg's boy, Elijah Vera Tucker, who unfortunately just cannot stay healthy, man, due to freak injuries, Just don't play in Denver. The past 2 years he's went to Denver, it's a season-ending injury. Thankfully, we do not play in Denver this year. They come to us. Hopefully Zach Wilson's starting that game, which would be great. So as long as he stays healthy, you've heard about the Joe Tittman snaps in camp where he can't snap the ball. He's got that cleaned up over the past few weeks, so cross your fingers on him. And then Morgan Moses, a solid veteran who's been here. He was good for the Ravens. And then we go and we draft Olu Fashanu. Everyone New York wanted Brock Bowers bad, banging the table, but I think this is going to pay off. I think we're going to see Olu Fashanu play at least, 4 or 5 games, and then everyone's not going to question about Brock Bowers being an extra weapon because we're going to get Devontae at the deadline. I promise you that. We brought in Mike Williams. Everyone knows Aaron loves his whole vertical threat receiver, so he hasn't really been practicing yet in team drills, but so far, everyone said he looks okay. So we'll see, obviously, when the game starts. Lazard can fuck off. Garrett Wilson looks different. I was at training camp 3 weeks ago. Guy looks like he's ready to take off, man. 1,500 yards. So get ready for him. And then Breece Hall. Like I told Big Rat last year, he wanted to use the ACL. A running back can't possibly have a good season. The first year back off an ACL. Breece Hall looked great.
Here comes the Trump
listen. Off of 7, 8, 9 minute stack boxes with a horrible O-line, still looked phenomenal. What do you think he's going to do this year? When you actually have a quarterback, with the threat of the pass. So, I mean, if I had the number 1 pick in fantasy, I'm taking Breece Hall, not to be a homer. So that side of the ball, we're looking okay. All it comes down to is health for me, man. That's all it comes down to. As far as the defense goes, we got the Hassan Reddick thing going on right now. According to sources, he will be reporting on Labor Day. That's what I was told. So as long as he's there, that's your Bryce Huff replacement. And then, everyone else is the same. Everyone else, that's the top 5 defense from last year. So there's not really much that changed on the defense. Could it regress a little bit? Maybe. But is it going to regress to the point where it's going to cost you games? I don't think so. I still think that's a top unit.
One quick thing I want to add. Sorry, I'm talking about over-unders. No. I just want to talk quickly just because with Breece Hall.
Okay.
One great future, if you're looking at it, the NFL is for him to win Offensive Player of the Year. It's at plus 1,800 right now. And here's my logic behind it. Aaron Rodgers is coming off an Achilles injury. And for as good as Garrett Wilson is, when was the last time Aaron Rodgers truly had a horse that could run the ball? You can just a plow horse that you can just give the ball and know he's going to find the holes, he's going to cut, he's going to go around. Because Big Rat and I last year were dead wrong about Breece Hall. We thought that, he was coming off his own injuries in Denver, ironically, too, Danny. But we thought it would take a bit to get back. No, he came back right away. He's going top 5 in fantasy football drafts, if not 3, 2, or 1. I think it's great value if you are looking at it for Offensive Player of the Year because the candidates in front of him are Tyreek Hill, Christian McCaffrey, CeeDee Lamb, Chase Jefferson, Bijan Robinson, St. Brown, A.J. Brown. But with Breece Hall, he can truly be the catalyst of that Jets offense.
So the thing with Breece is he's also a very damn good receiver. So you have to factor that as well.
Yes, and Rodgers likes those.
Yeah, no, it's a great long shot bet. Honestly, I mean it's not, I think it's probably Tyreek Hill because Tyreek Hill is a fucking alien. But
the problem with Tyreek Hill for Offensive Player of the Year is that if he were to have a season like that where he's like 8, 17, 18, 1,900 yards and the Dolphins have like a really high seed, he's just as likely to steal the MVP because like that's what we've seen the last few years. He gets genuine MVP consideration because people don't want to give it to Tua. So like that could come into conflict a little bit because very rarely these days do we give that award to both the same player now. Now we give MVP to the quarterback, and then offensive player is like our favorite skill guy that we couldn't possibly vote for MVP for whatever reason.
So the thing with Breece is they drafted this kid Braylon Allen out of Wisconsin, and I think he's going to take a shitload of goal line touches away from Breece. Like Breece didn't really get a lot of goal line touches last year. I think he didn't get under 5 until like week 16 or something like it was some wild stat. I mean, they didn't get to the goal line a lot, of course, but Braylon Allen's just this big physical, like almost like a Derrick Henry type. I don't want to compare him to Derrick Henry, but I think they're gonna give him the ball a lot, and that might hurt Breece Hall for that. But we'll see.
One other question I have.
Yeah, Braylon Allen's 235 pounds. That's a big deal.
Danny, there's one other question I have for you. You guys selected a cornerback from a certain team that I cover in the 5th round this year. How's he been looking so far for the Jets? How's Quintez been looking?
Stiggers, yeah.
Yeah.
He's been holding. You know, for a 5th round corner, he looks like he has a feel for the game. He's been holding up. You know, he's been tested a little bit, and he hasn't really given up the big play. I was really impressed with his tackling. Seems like he has a nose for the football, which is, you know, you really want that out of your corners. So, you know, he's a good depth option. I don't want to see him this year, of course, but, you know, someone to have on the roster, fine, absolutely. They're not paying DJ Reed next year. He's going to be walking, so there's going to be, you know, an open spot next year. So, you know, maybe he fills in. They have Eccles, who's also he picks off Tua every time he plays him. Big Rush should know that name.
He does. Eccles and Matt Milano, which is why, like, I agree with Griff. You never want to root for injury, but all of Tua's worst moments against Buffalo, Matt Milano's involved in like 80% of them. So the fact that he's not playing in that week 2 game and probably not in the second game either.
Yeah, no way. I mean,
Thanksgiving.
I do think the return this year is legitimate. Like, I think that's a thing that happens often, but I think it's like into December. Like, I think it's if they get 4 regular season games out of them, I think that'll be a huge win. There's no chance.
So probably right around when we come to town, Greg, right?
Well, I guess
the Patriots might play Milano twice for sure. That's absolutely possible.
With Danny's team, I think what's hard for me to come up with questions like I did with Greg is that it feels like the whole team is.
That's the question.
How healthy are all these guys? How healthy? And I just don't know how to talk about that. Like, how do we break that down? Like,
dude, it's like when I was, you know, like 12 and I would just turn injuries off on Madden because it wasn't fun. If you could turn injuries off, that's the best roster in the league. I'm not even like I'm not blowing smoke. Like, that's the best roster in the league. But if you tell me you think, especially the fact that the playoffs are after the 17 games, like there might be an 8-game stretch where Mike Williams and Tyron Smith and Morgan Moses and Aaron Rodgers are all healthy, but the fact that you need it to be 4 games after the 17 games, and there's a possibility that happens. And again, I think the Fashanu draft pick was really smart because now you have an immediate high-level Band-Aid that goes in, and it's not some turnstile that's going to get Rodgers hit. There is a big drop-off, I think, after Wilson. I think Wilson is an absolute stud. I agree 100%, Danny. I've targeted him all over fantasy. I think he is a monster. I think he's going to have a Devontae Adams-type season. Speaking of, I wanted to give you a hard time, but like as you said that, I was like, damn it, they're going to trade for Adams, aren't they? Like, it was literally what went through my head was that Rodgers is going to make them trade.
It's a foregone conclusion. It's going to happen.
That's like absolutely possible.
Because Devontae, the Raiders are going to respect Devontae, and because Devontae's already said if it's going to be anywhere, it's going to be again with Rodgers. You know, yep.
It's what he wants, and Rodgers is going to try to press the Jets' hand. And if I was rooting for the Jets, what you need is you need that stretch of health to be between now and the trade deadline, and not have a bunch of early hiccups where you know the Johnson family and you know the front office gets like cold feet about whether to go all in. You need them to get a hot start where they feel really good about it. Like, okay, here's the cherry on top, Devontae Adams. And I won't lie.
So I do think they're gonna lose week 1 to the Niners, and people are gonna overreact like, oh, you know, these are who the Jets are, blah blah blah. But if you look at that stretch after the 49ers of that run of bad teams that they play, there's no reason why they shouldn't have a 5-6 game win streak right there.
Titans,
Patriots, you know what I mean.
Broncos, Vikings, like this.
They should hit the ground running. Absolutely.
4-1 starts very, very.
Is it the Vikings game in London too?
Yeah.
One Dolphins. I do think the schedule broke right for the Dolphins this year in terms of playing Buffalo early. Just because I know that when we play Buffalo week 2, you know, knock on wood, nothing crazy. All our injury-prone guys are probably going to be there. Tua's probably going to be there. Teron Armstead's probably going to be there. You know, Phillips thankfully is going to be there. Chubb obviously not, but nonetheless,
we're the team now that has all the turnover and figuring stuff out. Like I feel way better about how I think the team's going to look towards the end of the season. I am very much expecting kind of a hit or miss start because they got a ton of new pieces in new places.
And so, yeah, look, I mean, a week 2 Thursday game. I mean, you have to go on the road on a short week while still figuring a lot out. It just feels like it sets up well for Miami. Miami could choke. Like that. I'm not ruling that out. Trust me. I'm just saying.
I hadn't looked at the Jets' schedule either. I mean, obviously that Bills Monday night game will be a big one, but then it follows up right there with Steelers Patriots.
Well, I think what helps
have a nice schedule.
The Jets, the one thing with the Jets that I think I take solace in, because I will admit, like, look, Danny, things look better. The Rodgers thing, I mean, it is what it is. Like, if he tears his Achilles again, like, the whole season's over. Like, if he doesn't, like, it's just, I don't know how to talk about that, like I said. But I will say, one thing I like for the Dolphins is that both Jets games for the Miami are later. They're both in December. Danny might view that as a positive, because he would say Tua sucks in the cold, whatever. Tua has never lost to the Jets, never lost to the Patriots. Like, undefeated against both. It's part of the reason why they always have a winning season, because he goes 4-0 against those two teams every year.
We've never even beat Mac Jones. Like, what that doesn't make sense. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't matter. QB, like you say, QB wins do not matter.
Well, no. But what I'm trying to say is he's won in New York in, like, late November, early December a few times already. Now, yes, and also, as you know this, that is, for those that don't know, the Dolphins-Jets game in New York is the one game that the Dolphins fan base shows up for big.
Week 18.
They get a lot of fans in that building. It's like a thing. Because if you know anything about the dynamics of Miami, half of Miami is actually from New York.
Yeah, it's just snowbirds. Depends on which time. So which time of the year where they're at.
And but so yeah, I will predict that the Dolphins will go 1-1 against the Jets. I will predict that the Jets will go 1-1 against Buffalo, because they seem to do that even when Aaron Rodgers is not the quarterback for whatever reason.
Out of every defense in the league, the one that Josh Allen struggles with the most is the Jets, by far. The Jets by far.
So Joe Brady's offense has me a little worried, though. I think that's more fit to beat a solid defense. So we'll see about that.
Hopefully the condensed sets, more run game, more two tight end, more before, when you're for most teams, when it's like, oh hey, it's 3rd and 7, we're going to Diggs, but good luck guarding him. Well, that's different when you have Sauce Gardner. Like that's different when you can be like, oh, that's fine, we'll take our chances with Sauce. For most teams, you can't do a ton about it. Like, they could still get open, but Sauce could lock him down, and then all of a sudden it's now going the other places. And you needed,
I mean, like you said, like for Josh Allen, like he's an off-scheduled quarterback. Like he gets bored a lot. Can he stay within the offense and move the chains like that instead of always going for that big play? Like week 1 when we played you guys last year, he was just airing the fucking ball out. Jordan Whitehead, who's a horrible safety, has a 3-pick game, which is unheard of. So if he can stay on schedule and just, follow what Brady's telling him to do and not, go and do his own thing, it's going to be tough. But
well, it's why Tua, like, despite that Brandon Nichols pick 6 on Thanksgiving that got a lot of attention, in general, the Dolphins had 2 great games against the Jets defense both times. That's the best argument you can make about, like, the Dolphins offense ability with their terrible O-line, with their inconsistent, but in my opinion, very talented quarterback. The argument is always a great defense can figure this out. The Jets couldn't twice. Tyreek and Waddle each had 100 yards both times we played them. Tyreek didn't play the second game, but Waddle had 100 yards both games. And it makes sense because, against most teams, you could trust DJ Reed and Sauce to stick on an outside receiver and trust that they'll win often enough to justify devoting the attention of your linebackers and safeties elsewhere. But they do that against the Dolphins in Week 14 last year, and Jalen Waddle burns DJ Reed on one-on-one coverage for a 50-yard touchdown because he's that good. And more importantly, not that there's better receivers than Jalen Waddle, but he's fast. Like, it's how it breaks the defense and how they overreact to him once he does something like that. And then the middle is open where Tua can be a little more patient. I'm not saying that'll happen this year, but it is to Tua's credit and McDaniel's credit. Like, they do exactly what Danny says Josh Allen should do. Like, they don't go out of the pocket. They don't try to do how to structure play.
Take what they're given.
Stay on schedule. Be the smart player. That's why, like people, like, falsely, I think there was a time last year where people thought, let's play single high safety because Tua can't hit the deep ball. Tua is one of the best deep ball throwers in the NFL. I don't want to go on a long rant on this. Like, the stats are what they are. Everyone will watch Tyreek Hill catch the underthrown ball in the playoff game and they will assume that happened all year. It didn't. You can just look up Tyreek Hill's highlight video. I don't need to explain it. Whenever you play single coverage, they immediately go to that play right away and score an 80-yard touchdown. And then for most quarterbacks, it's play too high, take away the big play, make the quarterback stay disciplined. But that plays to what Tua was doing earlier in his career. Like take the short 4-yard throw to the tight end. That's what he used to get panned for. That he only does that he doesn't do any of the big plays. It's more comfortable for him to do that if he has to, if the game calls for it.
My million-dollar question with, not even million-dollar question with the Jets, but my big question is the start of the season. I know after San Francisco gets easy, but is there any worry there, the fact that it's play on a Monday on the West Coast, late flight back Monday night, then you get in Tuesday morning, then it's Saturday down to Nashville, and then it's turned back around because guess what? Thursday night football. Nothing to do with opponents, but is the travel, the fact that there's 3 games in the first 10 days, anything of a concern?
That's super fair. And I mean, none of the starters played any preseason, so they're going to be, bruised up after that first Monday night game. So the recovery process is going to be, their bodies aren't used to getting hit yet. So I mean, that's a totally valid point. But I think, sometimes you gotta trust your talent, and you gotta go from there. These guys, they're way better than the Titans, and they're way better than the Patriots. They have to win those games.
Speaking of which, it's finally my turn, because you know what? Like Greg said earlier, every rodeo needs its clown, and guess who finally has the pleasure of being the rodeo clown in this division?
Hey, you had 20 years.
Oh, it's not asking you to feel bad. It's just, instead of me saying what I have to say, because I feel like it's very generic, I want to flip it to you to see what questions you guys have for me.
Did Jacoby Brissett die tonight against the Commanders?
So I have the game on right here. I just know he's not returning. I think it's a shoulder, so everyone's going to take it now. As always, Drake and what's going to happen?
Oh no, he for real got like one of those hits where if it comes out after the game that he broke his collarbone, I won't be shocked. Like defensive end, full weight with him landing sideways.
That's exciting.
So
leave the game.
It was. I'm just going to scroll. I'm just scrolling through Twitter right now quickly just to see if I get any quick updates. So the big thing, too, is that Drake May did lose his shoe during a snap. But, clearly in pain, getting walloped by an unblocked commander. So that's the last report from Zach Cox. And then, obviously, friend of the show, I was looking at welcome friend of the show, Sophie Weller. She didn't really have any updates either as well, who will be here on Tuesday, by the way, cheap plug. But, no, so we'll have to wait. I guess it's just a wait and see tomorrow.
So I think, once you find out there, I think May has shown some exciting traits that if I was a Patriots fan, I'd be excited about what he potentially could be. But the idea that you might David Carr him if you have to play him behind this offensive line this season would terrify me. Like the offensive line the Patriots are going to put out is
it's
like
basically like this. Like center, I'm confident in. Like David Andrews, I'm cool with. He's older, but I'm fine with him. Michael Onwenu and City So, I'm okay with. Left tackle for me is where it's the glaring, like, for the love of God, not Viridian Low. That's all I ask for, but it's not a fun offensive line this year. It's going to be a bottom 5 offensive line in the league, and I don't want to see Drake May get pummeled. The ideal start for me was always either one of 2 games. It was either the Houston game or New York. I leave out Jacksonville because I don't want to see them travel across the pond, and that's where Drake May's first start is. I don't want to see that. I'd rather see that be on American soil. No pun intended, but I'd rather see it against, the Miami game, the Houston game, or when the Jets come to town. That's one other point I'll make about the Jets, too, is the fact that the Patriots play the Jets before the trade deadline, so sure, they may get Matt Milano, but they may not get Devontae Adams at all this year.
Yeah. So, if ideally you would have Brissett be healthy, make it through the first 8 games, and then have him go in for that Titans, Bears, Rams, Dolphins, Colts stretch, but get past that Jets game, get past the 49ers, obviously, some of those early tough ones, and have a stretch there. Because I have no idea if May is going to end up good. Quarterback draft picks nowadays are 50-50 for a reason. We'll find out once it gets going. But I do know that more teams ruin quarterbacks than quarterbacks bust on their own, and getting him to where he gets the Darnold seeing ghosts and stuff like that, because you're just constantly worried about who's coming around the bend because your tackles can't keep pass rushers off of you. That would terrify me. I think that Christian Gonzalez is a stud. I think even with, obviously trading away Judon and the blood clot thing for Barmore is very scary. So obviously, hopefully he's healthy. But there's a ton of talent on that defense. I think Stevenson is good. The interior of the offensive line is good. I actually think there's some intriguing, fun receivers. I like Pop Douglas a lot. I really loved Javon Baker in the draft. I was so pissed when the Patriots got him. I think there's some reason to kind of grasp for the future, but that's what would terrify me. The one big thing is, can Brissett survive behind this offensive line? And if he can't, what could that do to May and potentially?
That's exactly how I feel with it. It's just basically, I don't want to see May get ruined immediately. The Mac Jones thing, obviously, it didn't work out. He fizzled out. He just lost mental confidence in himself. That's what happened. He's playing amazing in Jacksonville, and I'm super happy for the guy. That's the thing I can say. I'm happy to see. I know it's preseason ball, but still, I'm just happy to see him thrive. But with New England, with Drake May, all I ask for is kind of like what you guys saw with Josh Allen in 2018. Where you didn't have the best season, but you see it. You can see that. Hey, you see the flashes
enough flashes.
Okay, he's not a golden goose yet, but if we can get the mechanics right, if we can fix these little nuanced things, because I know everyone's worrying about how will he transition from North Carolina, or in the case of Josh Allen, Wyoming, to the NFL. But if I can see those traits to where, look, obviously lost out on Brandon Ayuk, we know why. It's an ugly situation right now. But going into next offseason, and Greg, this is a number you're very familiar with. Who has the most cap room in the NFL? So I'm just saying, if Drake May can go out and show, hey, there are those flashes there are those little nuanced things, that's where, maybe T. Higgins, there's a guy in Dallas who I would absolutely love to go pay, but I don't know what the hell's going on there. But, and obviously this year too, they said, Jerron Mayo said we were going to break out the checkbook when they saw the bump, the Taylor Swift cap bump, let's call it. That extra, what was it, $13 million per team or $30 million, one of the two? So when that number came out, he's like, oh, we're going to spend. They didn't end up spending, but this team essentially is what Elliott Wolf is doing. I know everyone's like, oh, draft and develop this, draft and develop that. They're keeping the guys around who they know have a long-term plan here. And also, too, it's, do you help Drake May? Like, for example, Michael Wanu helps Drake May. Kendrick Bourne helps him. Hunter Henry helps him. Ramondre Stevenson helps him. But then going on to the defensive side of the ball, they signed guys like Josh Uche came back. Anthony Jennings came back. Kyle Duggar got a nice contract. Christian Barmore, it sucks with the blood clot situation because he's arguably our best defender.
Is that assumed to be his season, or is that
it's a weird
still?
Mix of we just don't know. The last I've heard is that he posted on. Yeah,
I hear people talk about it like it's the season, but I don't know.
David Andrews had the same thing in 2019, so at this point, I would assume season. I think best case scenario would probably be around that Colts game, American Thanksgiving, unless he makes a miraculous recovery. It's just, and Big Rat will attest to this too, because obviously he's in the medical profession, but blood clots aren't something you mess with, so I'd rather just him take his time. And obviously the situations are different, but it's...
Yeah, that's the guy that you're hoping for
exactly.
10 more years.
I know this is going to be very different, but it's kind of like you guys with Hamlin, where at first, let's let the human get better before the football player gets better. That's how I view it.
Yeah. Well said. Yeah.
Are you? God, Greg. If Hamlin plays bad, there's going to be so many insensitive jokes during Bills games. I know you tune most of that out.
So I will say I don't think it matters a great deal. I think it's purely a placeholder until Cole Bishop steps in. So I do think it's very likely Hamlin is the Week 1 starter. If you ask me to put money on who the Week 7 starter is, I probably would think it'd be Bishop. I don't know exactly how long it'll take, but I actually think I don't think it's a 0% chance that Cole Bishop is a starter Week 1. I think it's in play. If he hadn't got hurt, I think he would have been, but he got hurt and missed his first 3 weeks of rookie, his rookie season training camp. but I do think that I think it's just a matter of time.
The other thing I want to just add to the Patriots quickly, though, is any Patriot fan will tell you this as well, and this is the main reason why I'm excited, is the fact that next draft they have 5 picks in the top 102. So they're a team where if you can show promise this year, you can draft properly next year, you can do everything else. And if they end up with the number 1 overall pick, I will say this, you trade that, you do what Chicago did. They are right now, I'm going to give this comparison because it was brought to my attention, they are right now where the 22 Bears were. You know, they're going to show flashes, but the win total is not going to be pretty.
Well, yeah, because like Chicago, they ended up using the number 1 pick this year, but last year when they traded down, yes, bro, during the Bryce Young draft, and you're not going to be that tempted anyways, because even though with college football you never know, like you never know when some generational quarterback comes from out of nowhere. Yeah. Next year's quarterback class doesn't seem that good, so it's not even like
to be. Yeah.
It's not supposed to be. Yeah, like Jaden Daniels, he wasn't an unknown. He had started for 5 years at Arizona State and then LSU, but no one thought
he'd take like a Burrow.
It
would take like that kind of season where hey, this transfer guy who couldn't even play at another school that none of us even know of, and it would be. So I'll use the example. So Burrow was a big deal coming out of high school, as a prospect, and was supposed to be the guy at Ohio State, and then it didn't work out for weird reasons. He actually got beat out by guys that were not that good, and then transfers, and then obviously goes to one of the most talented college rosters in history, up there with those early 2000s Miami teams. Crazy stockpile of talent. It would take something like that with a Quinn Ewers, where hey, none of us think that right now, but if all of a sudden he has this historically amazing season, we'd be like, oh, well, I mean, he was the number 1 guy coming out, and he was supposed to be really good, and this is the guy that. But it would take something like that. It would take something historic for someone to pop out. Because right now, you look at most 2025 draft things, and it's 10 other positions before you get to the first quarterback, which is unheard of.
Yeah, because I think you're seeing now, what happened in that Kenny Pickett draft. Now, granted, Pickett probably also shouldn't have been drafted in that first round, but the wholesale NFL rejection of all the quarterbacks to the 3rd round after Pickett, no one got taken in round 2.
Malik Willis
Zappy
and Matt Corral, Ritter.
Yeah, where I was at that draft and watched Malik Willis walk through a couple times.
Yes.
That was the one in Vegas.
Yeah.
And it was wild where everybody was assuming, and not only that, but all the way through the 2nd round and late into day 2, and it was it's a very human moment where you feel for a guy that he didn't do anything wrong. In the grand scheme of things, he should have never been told that it was possible he was going to go in the first. That's the sucky part.
The failure.
Is that he was if no one ever tells him that, they don't invite him to the draft. None of that ever happens, and it's Desmond Ritter this year, or not Spencer Rattler this year. Yeah. Hey, he had a perfectly good experience. He got drafted when he was supposed to get drafted, and nobody pumped it up beyond what it is, and now he's actually probably exceeding expectations in New Orleans because the bar was reasonable. But would you invite a guy to day 1?
Yeah. At least when they did that to Geno Smith, I built he went at the top of the 2nd round. There was enough credible evidence that Geno Smith could have gone in the 1st round. It's yeah, you were wrong, but you were wrong by a little bit. It's understandable.
That's Will Levis. When Will Levis, all the rumors were he was going to go 5th to the Colts or whatever it was, and then he started to fall, and then they stopped it by going up at I think literally the 33rd pick or whatever it was. That's all relative. That's basically still a 1st rounder, and now seeing him that's basically what it should have been. He's a high upside but risky quarterback pick. But when you see the highlights, you're oh, well, that's a 1st round highlight kind of guy. He could have done that, but I kind of get why so many teams passed on him. You don't get that with some of those other guys who fell in the 3rd round.
Yeah.
So quick, it's not breaking news, but Peter Schrager has put out a handful of pretty hinted tweets about all the connections between Washington and San Francisco. And it just, someone like him doesn't put that out there if he's not hearing something.
Yeah.
But it's a bunch of stuff about Brandon Ayuk and why people should pay more attention to the connections
Adam
between
Peters.
Washington and San Francisco. And that's
Yeah.
Adam Peters was there in the 2020 draft doing that. Jaden Daniels, go-to guy at Arizona State, was Ayuk. They have the extra third rounder from Jahan Dotson now. So as much as Pitt has gotten all the buzz, shouldn't Washington, San Francisco be the one we're talking about? Like,
yeah, he's not guessing.
He didn't learn those three bullet points today.
I'm pretty sure Schrager's. I think he's the godson to McVay's kid.
Something like that. It is something like that.
He's legit a Dolphins fan. He's not very public with it, but he's a legit Dolphins fan.
I think I knew that.
Yeah, he's confirmed it, with a bunch of Dolphins reporters. But for whatever reason, I don't know.
I mean, he literally works for the league. He is an NFL employee with Good Morning Football and all the different stuff he does. So they probably discourage him from talking about having a team. But that makes it because I think Kyle Brandt loves every team. So every team is pretty sure that Kyle Brandt loves their team. So I think that's how he plays it off. He's actually a Bears fan.
Bears fan, but he loves Buffalo.
And Griff.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I think Buffalo might be a second favorite team. I'm pretty sure it's the second favorite. But he grew up as a Bears fan. He grew up a Bears fan.
And I think Griff, the Patriots can have a fun developing 4-13 season. Drake May shows you a lot. Just beat Buffalo again, please. One time, one of those two games. It's really
well. So quick thing with the draft thing that Big Rat brought up. One of the nicest bonuses for the Patriots is that, I'm not. It is fun for me to twist the knife, but I didn't mean to twist the knife. You guys are obviously in the running for the first overall pick. I'm not breaking news to anybody here. There's 3 or 4 stud tackles in this draft class. So there may not be quarterbacks, but there are some stud offensive tackles. So this is a great year to have a top 5-ish pick and need. Well,
Campbell's at the top of my list for that right now at LSU.
Not all bad.
Yeah.
And Gun, I was going to ask before we sign off. I was going to ask Danny this, but I know he's not here. But I'll ask all three of you. Gun to your head, winning the division. Greg, I'm guessing you're going to say Buffalo, the Ric Flair. If you to be the man, you got to beat the man kind of logic. I'm guessing.
Yeah, correct.
I will say that if the Dolphins beat the Bills week 2, then I think that Dolphins-Jets game, which is week 18, and the NFL usually does these things for a reason, I think that game will decide the division if the Dolphins beat the Bills in week 2.
There is absolutely a path where the Bills dig a hole they can't dig out of and don't get the Will Levis miracle like they got last year to be able to get back into it. I will say I would wager a fair amount that there's a point at a material time into the season where the Jets have a sole possession of first place. I do think the Jets will win the most games early in the season while that stacked roster is healthy. And then it's just a matter of can they keep it together, because they got to keep it together for continuing to win, and the schedule gets much harder down the stretch. Yeah. So that's going to be the interesting part, because the Bills play a really hard schedule, but then it kind of eases up a little bit. So they're doing a bunch of new stuff. I don't think they're going to go for a losing record, but they could be 5-3 or something like that, 6-4, something like that. I wouldn't be shocked, but so far they've gotten hot down the stretch often, and this is the kind of team that would do that. They just got to be careful not to dig too big of a hole.
Yeah, and to survive, and not just for them, unfortunately, because this stuff does matter in New York. You hear it from players. It's not just a fan narrative. When they start losing, it's not just, you have less margin for error in how many games you win or lose. It's the noise is very loud, and it's loud in a way that matters. It's loud in a way that affects people in that building. Can you lose Tyron Smith for just a month? Season's not over, just a month. But you go 1-3 in that stretch, and everyone is going crazy because the head coach and the GM are both on the hot seat. Can you just survive that? And I'm not even ruling it out. I know I come across as critical of them when I say this, but maybe they can just stomach through it. But I just think it's another thing they have to deal with that other teams don't have to deal with.
So one thing I want to go with quickly before I'm still going Buffalo to win the division just because I know at the end of the day, like they're saying, not the Ric Flair narrative, but the whole I just think that they've been getting a little bit disrespected this offseason and overlooked just because of who they've lost. And I know, but my thing with them is just at the end of the day, Josh Allen. If Josh Allen is still Josh Allen, they'll be fine. That's my thing with Buffalo. I want to, and then because with New York, it's a prove it. I want to see it on the field. I don't want to hear hypotheticals. I don't need to hear Mike Greenberg pumping tires. I need to, in which I will say this: you will see some stupidly ungodly takes if they beat San Francisco Week 1. You're going to see some.
Oh my God! If they beat San Francisco in the
Get Up is going to be unwatchable than it already is.
And
more than anything else, though, I just want to before we end. I was looking because I just quickly looked at Week 1. There are 2 bets on for Week 1 that I love, and they feature 2 of our teams, and that is the over with Arizona and Buffalo.
Agreed.
And the Patriots +9 against Cincinnati. I'm only saying this right now because I think I have some logic with this one.
It's a hold your nose.
It's not. I only say this because look, since we don't know what Cincinnati's going to be, Jamar Chase just returned. Joe Burrow's coming off this weird wrist injury, so it wouldn't shock me to see the Patriots and everyone's like, "Oh, is New England back?" And then Week 2, Seattle just for some reason kicks their ass, so they get their ass kicked on Thursday Night Football against against the Jets. But I look at New England this year where I'm like, I don't know if they'll be good record-wise, but in 2020, the 1-15 Jaguars still had a 7-9 in record against the spread, which is the same spread record as the Kansas City Chiefs that year. So I'm just saying, that's where I think with New England's defense, they can keep it in a lot of games. They're one of those teams where it's going to be like 22-23, where if it's a low-scoring game and the offense doesn't screw up enough, I think they have a chance. But if they have games where, look, they're just outclassed, they're outmatched, they don't stand a chance. Like I look at San Francisco Week 4 like that. I look at Miami Week 5 like that. I look at what's another one I'm going to throw out there? The Rams game is another one. San Francisco for me is the ultimate. Hold your breath and count to 10. Just get through it. But one game for the Patriots that I want to watch because I'm a football sicko is Week 15 when Christian Gonzalez is lined up against Marvin Harrison Jr. That is a matchup I'm looking forward to in Arizona Week 15.
It's fun.
And I'll just say very quickly the ones we talked about before we started recording for Week 1. Take the Colts on the spread against Houston. The game is in Indianapolis. Everyone is going to be on Houston. Everyone is pumping up Houston. You know Anthony Richardson's healthy now. Greg, before you got on, one thing I said about the Colts was I'm really high on their upside. I think that their division odds are really good. I just have no way of knowing if Anthony Richardson's going to play a full season because I just cannot. I know we just write off injuries as we can't predict it, but with Anthony Richardson in particular, it is a weird one for me because I followed him kind of closely at Florida, being a Canes fan. He's always had random things that ding him up. He played a crazy low amount of games last year from start to finish. I want to know, are you going to be fully healthy?
I read something that said if he plays all 17 games this season, it will be more games than he played going all the way back to high school?
Correct. Yeah, because he only started 12 games last year at Florida. And then he only started 3 the year before that and 2 start to finish last year. So, yeah.
I read that somewhere. If he starts and finishes all 17 games this year, maybe it was if they make the playoffs, but something like that. It was it would equal or surpass every game he had played since high school.
I'm just looking. Just before we go, I'm looking at one more point. Right now, only 46% of the money is on the Colts for Week 1. 46%. Yes, that's for right now. And then the most lopsided one, obviously, is New England Cincinnati, where New England only has 21% of the money coming in on them.
Vegas, and for Vegas for Week 2 for the Super Bowl. I mean, truly, it really is my team's Super Bowl. The only reason I have any optimism that they can beat Buffalo this year is just because of the timing of this game. If this game was later in the year, I would very much be the Dolphins can go 11-6 again, but Buffalo probably wins the division. This game gives them a chance because of how early it is. The spread is Dolphins -1. So it's Vegas very much being we know Buffalo's probably going to be better by the end of the year than they are now, but are they Dolphins probably going to be worse by the end of the year as they are now, but for this game, for this moment, what do? We don't really know what to do.
And one more thing I wanted to do quickly before we go off the air is just send our best to the family of Joe D. Alessandris, the offensive line coach from the Baltimore Ravens, who passed away this morning. That was very just unexpected out of nowhere, but still, it's just a very young age, and also the fact that he's
former Bills offensive line coach, all-time great.
Just a thing, you got to send respect to there. And one other bet I like for week 1, I don't know why, but is the Packers as an underdog against the Eagles in Brazil. I wouldn't pick it for survival just because with travel and everything you don't know, but I think I'm going Colts week 1 survival, Big Ret.
I'm just saying, I like giving ballsy picks week 1. I think home division underdogs. The market knows that's a good bet, but I think it's an even better bet than people realize. And I feel like Colts are a little underrated and Houston's a little overrated right now. So
one blow-up spot for week 1, because I was going to go with this, but I could see is Seattle over Denver. I can see a lot of people picking Seattle to win in that game. I can see that game where Denver wins and gives a lot of people strikes off the top.
Probably. Yeah, because that would very likely be my. Obviously, most people are going to be picking Cincinnati for their eliminator pools. I think I would probably pick the Seahawks. I think Mike McDonald's going to make a huge difference with that defense. There was a lot of talent there previously, and now you bring a great defensive mind in. I think it's going to be.
He's a sneaky coach of the year candidate for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, gentlemen, football season's here. Let's have some fun. And like Greg said earlier, you know what? Every clown needs its rodeo. Every rodeo needs its clown. It's been a long podcast. Enjoy the season, guys. NFC show coming up tomorrow night.